Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Bret. This is my live show here every week on Thursdays, and glad you're here with me. So, if you're watching this live, the way this works is I spend an hour, maybe two, if we get tons of questions like lately, um, answering your questions and going into maybe some recent topics, some things that I'm working on, what's next for my courses and my open source content, and all those things. And if you can hear them, I've actually got some jets outside. So recently, we have a local jet base here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. There's actually 12 military bases. It's one of the biggest military hubs in the U.S. And we have an air show every year. And for the last few weeks, it seems like whenever I hit the record button, there's a jet flying overhead doing some stunts. So this year, because of COVID, they did it virtually, and I got to watch it on YouTube, and it wasn't near as thrilling as having a jet over your head, but it was. I learned a lot more because I could hear the announcer. You could instead of the jets or the helicopter blades making all the noise, you could actually hear what they were saying over the loudspeakers on YouTube. So I actually learned something about how helicopters work and a little bit about old airplanes and old airplane technology. So if you're into things that fly, it was a pretty cool time. So this week I've got some news, but first up, just a reminder, you probably saw that in the reel, and if you've been here before, you've heard me talk about it. But this show, as well as the podcast that comes from it, all the work we do to schedule guests, which we've got one coming up next week, talk about a Argo CD, which is a GitOps style of automated CI/CD, mostly just CD we're going to focus on, but there's also the integration and testing stuff. So we do all that work. I've got all these open source repos, example repos. Obviously, there's the courses, but you pay for those elsewhere. Here, Patreon is all about two things. One, just buying me a coffee every month to thank us for all this stuff we do in open source and open content for free, and then also all of the benefits and other things you get by doing it. So one of the things you can do in case you're not able to afford a few dollars a month, which is fine. If you just want to follow, you're not sure about whether I'm worth a couple of dollars, that's totally fine. You can click the follow button there, which most people don't know about. And the reason you want to do that is because on Patreon, that's where I go first to talk about what I'm doing. So it's not a Twitter feed. It's not me sharing news in the community. This is about what I'm creating and what I'm updating. So when I make a major new release of one of my GitHub example repos, you'll see it there. When I launch a new podcast, you'll see it there. When I finally get out another newsletter, you would see that there. Or a new course, or anything else I'm creating, a new blog post, which I'm working on the epic tale of Docker versus Kubernetes. And it's now at over 2,500 words, which it needs to shrink down. But I've been working on that all week, and that'll be posted here soon. So you can support me there. You can support me in the packages, the two membership levels. I'm getting ready to hit the go button on a High Fivers monthly scheduled hangout. So once a month, people on the High Fiver plan, we all get together for sort of a lunch hangout. It's not me preaching at you about containers or DevOps. This is just people hanging out. Mostly it's professionals in the field of DevOps that are just wanting to learn from each other and wanting to meet other fellow DevOps practitioners. Maybe you're a developer, maybe you're an operator and a sysadmin. Maybe you can be on the other side of that line, and you can be young, you can be old, you can be anything, and you just hang out there and learn from others. Sometimes we go down a rabbit hole of a topic that someone's working on a project. Sometimes we just all go around the table and just talk about what we're working on, and then we move on. You never know, right? It's water cooler hour. So you can sign up for that, but you can click the follow button if you simply want to get all the updates on what I'm doing. All right. And we've been doing that all year. It's been kind of fun doing Patreon. It's not exactly meant for, technology people per se. It's very heavy on the creative and art side in terms of Patreon itself, but I like it. I think that the app notifications are really great. I support probably half a dozen people or more on Patreon now that I like, other artists and people that I like and I want to get updates on, and it kind of feels good to buy them a coffee every month. So I like it, and that's where I got the idea to maybe give it a shot for this community. So there's that. That's one. We're gonna get to the questions in a minute. Two is I wanted to go through some news and recommend a couple of things to you. So let me post this in chat, actually. So here's the Patreon link. That's okay, Tuna. If you don't have the funds, that's totally fine. Just click that follow button there. Sign up for Patreon, and you can do that with a lot of people on Patreon if you're fans of them. I follow people on there like people that are tech news people, security news people, gaming people that I like, artists that I like. There's lots of people on there that I follow. Some of them I actually become members of, and some of them I just follow. But it's kind of nice because it gets rid of all the noise of social media, and it's just talking about what they're doing, which is kind of like a short blog, or a short, like a Twitter version of the blog or something. I don't know what you want to call it. Anyway, I dig it, and I use it myself as a member of other people. So back here on Twitter, this post, I talked about some news that came out, actually some news on Tech Target about Mirantis. And if you knew about Mirantis, they were the ones that bought a majority of Docker's staff and all of their closed source, as well as taking over the open source responsibility for Swarm in the form of SwarmKit. If you know anything about Swarm, Swarm is the feature in Docker, but the library underneath it that provides the functionality is known as SwarmKit, which is an open source repo. Docker still manages that repo, but Mirantis has pledged support, and they continue to do that all year long. They've done it at least 2 or 3 times. So anyway, they have some more news. The CEO was in an interview, and I thought it was pretty interesting. And I give you sort of my take, and some people commented on that, including Darren Shepard, someone who is the co-founder of a company that creates a competitor to Swarm, technically, like K3s, which he wanted to make the Kubernetes of Swarm. The Swarm of Kubernetes. That's what Darren wanted to do. He was actually on the show last year. If you go back in the YouTube archives, you can see Darren Shepard on the show, one of the co-founders of Rancher. Anyway, that was a great discussion. Would love to hear y'all's opinions. And I think that there's a hidden message in that Tech Target announcement. And I kind of talk about it here in my sub post on that, about what I think is really going on in the background about Swarm. So there's that. Next up, HashiConf. So we had a HashiConf earlier this summer. I think it was in June. And HashiCorp are the makers of a ton of great tools, right? Terraform, all of you probably have heard of Terraform. If not, it's my preferred way to create cloud infrastructure. And, go check that out. It is one of their products. They make Vault, which is probably the most popular open source, non-tool specific secrets storage. So in Kubernetes, we have secret storage. In Swarm, we have secret storage. In Amazon, you have secret storage. The clouds all tend to have a secret storage. But if you want one that runs everywhere, then you tend to go for Vault. Also, if you have high security requirements and you want one secret store that manages it for everything, you would do Vault. So anyway, HashiCorp does lots of cool tech. And they're supposedly going to announce their first new project at this conference in October, next month. So I recommend you sign up. I'll send you the link to sign up over there. And you can get a free ticket to the conference. There are paid workshops for $40, but really to, I think, get the announcement and just get a lot of the sessions and information, you can just sign up for the free version that I signed up for earlier today, and it was pretty easy. I didn't have to give them a ton of information. I didn't have to give them my phone number and my social security number or anything. Sometimes these conference registrations can be a little crazy. All right, what's next? Hacktoberfest. So I'm wearing my Hacktoberfest t-shirt in honor of this announcement. So every year, DigitalOcean, I think for 5 years or so, has done a really interesting thing for the community, and I'm a big fan of it. You can go here, you can prep, you can sign up. I like that. I'm going to turn on dark mode. Let's do that. So Hacktoberfest is the entire month of October, and really what it's about is teaching you how to operate in open source. We all have some skill that we can contribute to open source. You may not be a programmer, and that's okay, because you might be using an open source tool and you might find that the documentation is lacking. Well, quite often that documentation will also be open source, and the way you update the documentation is through a GitHub pull request. It may not be on GitHub, but GitHub tends to be the focus. They are the 800-pound gorilla of open source code repositories. So what DigitalOcean does is they give us an incentive in the forms of prizes, mainly t-shirts and other potential prizes, I guess. They give us an incentive to go and try updating something in open source. And I can't recommend this enough. As someone who creates open source, who contributes to open source, when I first got started, I don't know, on GitHub 5 to 7 years ago, probably was really when I started getting into contributing to open source, especially around the time of Docker. Before that, it maybe was some small utilities that were in open source, maybe some Node stuff, because I used to be heavy into Node.js. But when I first got started, I was nervous. I mean, my first pull request was confusing and it was hard and I didn't get it right. And that's okay. That's what this whole month of October is going to be about. And that's what they're now doing is pre-timber. So for September, we're getting prepped, which means maybe going and reading something about GitHub or something about how to do a pull request or what is Git. If you're someone who doesn't know what the Git code versioning system is, or if it's really just a file versioning system, please go check this out. I think that if you're interested in tech at all, I don't care where you are in tech, knowing Git and GitHub is such a gravity around that world that if you knew that, it would pay dividends in your career at some point. You would have to learn a little bit about Markdown, which has become the standard language which we all write documentation and README files and basically comments. So Markdown as a markup language, interestingly enough, it's called Markdown, even though it's a markup language. It will maybe teach you a little bit about web programming like HTML, CSS, or maybe JavaScript. It will teach you about how to operate in a community of open source people that we're all completely decentralized. We're worldwide. You're dealing with multiple backgrounds, people from all sorts of countries and walks of life. So that is what I think this is really about next month. Oh, yes, you can also win a t-shirt. So it's gotten so popular that they don't actually give everyone a t-shirt nowadays. It's only, I think, the first so many that they give t-shirts. They give like $50,000 worth of t-shirts away. But it's gotten so popular that not everyone gets to have one. So jump in quick, jump in early, get your pull request in. Let me just give you a taste of that. So if you just jump over to GitHub, I'm going to be selfish. I did this a couple years ago on my blog where I posted all of the things that I wanted to work on and then all the things that I wished you would work on. I have a number of open source repos in my GitHub that you can check out. I would recommend either just looking at maybe my top 6 most popular right now, or going over to the repository tab and just searching for something that you're interested in, right? So for maybe you're interested in Java, and it'll show you anything in Java. Maybe you're interested in PHP, or maybe you're just interested in Docker, which will show you all sorts of things. Or, because I have lots of Docker stuff. Or maybe you're interested in stress testing a system, so you look up stress, and you find something like that. Or maybe you're interested in failover. No, maybe troubleshooting. No. Okay, so some of those words are failing. I need to add more keywords to my repos. But there's tons of stuff in there. Dozens of repos that I keep specifically for this audience, for people that are learning containers, learning DevOps, learning open source. There's all sorts of stuff in here from like Brown Coat, which is a tool that intentionally fails inside your cluster to sort of test rolling updates and failover in Swarm and Kubernetes. There's examples in PHP, Node.js, Java on how to do containers. I don't think there's a Python one in there yet. Yeah, I have tons of stuff in here. I have stuff from my different Docker cons on samples, including how to make a multi-stage Docker file like my DockerCon 19. So you put in issues, you ask questions in issues, you say, hey, would you be interested in this kind of pull request? Or, hey, is there anything in here that I could work on? And the way that it works for Oktoberfest is you go into one of these, and let's see if I have one in here, and you look in the issues. This may be a bad example. Oh, good, I found one. So you'll see the Hacktoberfest tag on issues that are often ones that are either easy for someone to do if it's their first PR. For example, this one might not be so hard if you're fluent a little bit in Kubernetes. Maybe if you've taken my Kubernetes course, then you can check that out. Kubernetes course would be up there at bretfisher.com. You could do that. So those ones that are labeled Hacktoberfest are often easy for people to do if they're maybe not a programmer, something like that. All right. So those are some of the things you can do. I will send you a link over to my GitHub. And I always appreciate support on my open source. Not everything is completely up to date. I get probably one pull request a week and a couple of issues a week on my repos. So it's a little hard to maintain it all. But with your support, we can do it. We can make open source better. All right, last couple of things. Last one, I wanted to mention real quick another YouTube channel that started up this year, Adrian Goins. He's from Rancher. And if you know anything about Rancher, if you've ever looked into Rancher, if you considered their new Rancher training on how to use Rancher Kubernetes, he's actually in charge of that. And he has a YouTube channel. I'm going to share it out. I highly recommend you go check it out. He's on a break right now. So this week, I believe, he is on a break, but he goes live, I think, like every weekday. It's a lot. So you can see on his channel, yeah, he was live on the 5th, the 6th. Oh, those are scheduled. Sorry. But look at that. He's scheduled for the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th. So he's live every day. It's a short little, maybe 15, 30-minute kind of thing, I think. Yeah. And he has a bunch of stuff every day. And he's talking about Kubernetes and cloud native, which is perfect. He's exactly the kind of thing that I wanted this show to be. And he does giveaways, including some of my courses for free. So if you show up live, he gives away something every day, I think, or every week. Maybe I think it's on Fridays. He only gives something away. But anyway, go check him out. Subscribe to him. Tell him I sent you. He's a friend of mine, and he's doing great work. And I definitely want to support him. He's doing good stuff over there. All right. And that's in there. Also, up next is, I started this last week, and I thought, what the heck? I'll keep the trend. It is the tweet of the week. So not every week is going to be ironic and useless, but this is tweet of the week. Feel free to check that one out. It kind of made my day, as well as the person who posted it, as well as the person who said when a startup deploys their application or blog with 10 users on Kubernetes. That's exactly what it is. So the lesson here, the irony of this is that quite often people want to just use Kubernetes because it's neat and fun and cool, or it's just a new piece of tech. And that can be a legitimate reason to use it. But often businesses will make it a requirement when it absolutely doesn't need to be a requirement, such in the case of making a blog. You do not need Kubernetes to host a blog. You don't even need a server anymore to host a blog. You can do it on a SaaS or on GitHub for free. So anyway, that was pretty funny. And I can only imagine if I was driving down the highway and I saw that, I would have a dilemma about whether or not to pull out my phone and try to take a picture because that's hilarious. So, all right. And then that's it. That's tweet of the week. Let's get to some questions. All right. The first one up before we even went live, from Jatin. Sorry if I mispronounced that. What is the difference between containers and images? So interestingly enough, I am writing a blog post, Docker versus Kubernetes, that touches on this stuff, and it breaks it down into two succinct definitions. And so I'm going to read from that because it's going to be faster for me to read from my blog post that I'm doing. By the way, has anyone ever heard of Notion? I'm a huge fan of Notion. I've mentioned it a few times on here. you basically go to Notion.so. Yeah. Yeah. This is a tool, not really DevOps related, but I just wanted to tell you that this has been a cornerstone to my workflows for 2 years now. It is amazing, and it's replaced probably 5 or more tools in my workflow. It's replaced Evernote for most things. It replaces Google Sheets and Google Docs for most things. It's replaced any Kanban. Is that how you say it? Kanban? I never know how to say it. Kanban or Kanban? I think it's Kanban. It replaces Kanban boards for me. It's replaced a ton of stuff. Anyway, it is a all-in-one note-taking, collaborating tool. You can store databases in it. You can store images in it. All sorts of stuff. You can write a blog in it. It's just a really great tool. It's hard to describe. Anyway, they don't have a referral link anymore, so I'm just going to put this in there anyway, because you can get a lot for free now. They used to have limited free, but now you can get a lot for free. So it's pretty great. And I love their database features. I'm constantly using it more. Let me know what you think of it if you use it. It is absolutely my number one tool all day long. I use it more than email. And my whole team now, my whole company uses it for all of our projects. So anyway, the point of that was to read you this blog post to answer your question shortly. Okay, so here's what I think about Docker. There are 3 things in Docker that Docker innovated on. The reason that we care so much about Docker really boils down to 3 innovations that they have. All right. One of them was the packaging or the image. It takes your application and all of its software updates, minus the OS kernel and hardware drivers, and bundles them into a set of tarballs, similar to a zip file. Those files are cryptographically hashed to ensure they are identical on every machine they run on. This app tarball and its metadata are known as a container image, which is seen as the modern way to package server apps. I feel like I'm reading a book. This is a huge deal compared to previous packaged systems like apt, yum, MSI, npm, maven, etc. that don't contain application dependencies. Okay, so that's a container image. The second innovation was easy app running. Docker runs these container images in their own isolated file system, where they get their own networking, resource limits, and can't see anything else on the host operating system, unless we allow it. It can do this in a single command. It has easy defaults for getting started and has many CLI options for changing the defaults. Docker calls this the batteries included but swappable approach. This opinionated approach keeps the CLI friendly and helps you get started quickly in Docker. It is the secret sauce that has made Docker internet famous for developers. So that is a container, right? Container is a running version of your image. It's as simple as that. The third thing that Docker did that really sealed the deal was easy app distribution. Docker created the idea of a container image registry, which lets you store images in a central HTTP server and push and pull them as easy as it is with Git commits. The idea of a built-in push and pull for your app images was an instant hit, and now container images registries are everywhere. It's like the server version of an Apple Google App Store. Okay? So had they only done the first couple of things, who knows? Docker may not have been that big a deal. There were certainly other programs before Docker, like LXC, which was creating containers out of your application. We had other tools like jails and zones that already isolated applications in Linux. We didn't really have a super equivalent for that on Microsoft on Windows. We had something from Microsoft called App something, and it kind of virtualized the app experience. Like you could send out multiple versions of Office. It was a very big paid-for product that they bought. Most people didn't have it because it was expensive. But that was the closest thing I'd ever seen to that, like a package distribution on Windows that was isolating inside of Windows. Anyway, it was these three key essential parts that were solving a huge problem in the industry, which was, how do I reproduce my application exactly the way it's on my machine, on every machine it runs on? How do I easily get it to those machines? And then how do I run it many times on that machine without them stepping on each other's feet, not foots. So anyway, that's part of the article. I'm hopefully going to get out this week, and who knows when it'll be posted. It's going to be posted on Udemy's site. But all right, that was question number one. Let's see if we can go faster. Hello, everyone. Hello. West Coast of Canada, Pakistan. Please update us on the K8s Mastery course. I get this question every week, and yes, it is coming. The next thing that I'm working on, you can even see it inside of my Notion, is the updates for 118 are becoming a higher priority than the next sections. So I've got dozens now of videos that have to change because 118 broke so many things. The biggest thing it broke was kube control run command, and that causes problems in people taking both of my Docker Mastery and my Kubernetes Mastery course. So we're in the middle of updating those, and then we're going to get back to the storage section. So I don't have a date for you. I know that people are anxiously waiting, and I'm sorry for the delays. Obviously, this year with COVID and other things happening, it has been a real challenge to focus on the videos, and I apologize for that. I was hoping that I could get out new sections every month. That has certainly not been happening, and I apologize for the delays there. But trust me, every week we're frantically working to get videos out faster, and we're actually bringing on help to help us with that, including things like better translations and improving some of the FAQs so that it helps with some of the problems that people have inside of the videos. All that stuff's being actively worked on every week. So thanks for asking. I'm glad to have fans that want to get more stuff from these courses because I want to give it. I want to put it in there. Hello. You were stationed in Fort Story in a past life. Yes, Fort Story is still around. Do I have a Twitch account? Yes, Tuna. I am currently broadcasting on Twitch live. So you can go to twitch.com/Bret Fisher. I'm pretty much Bret Fisher everywhere. So, yeah. Thanks, Emmanuel. I really appreciate it. This is why I do it. I do it to help people, and I'm always grateful to hear back from people how it affected them. And I got a really great email from someone this week. Man, it made my day. When I get a 2-paragraph email about all the ways that the courses have helped them in their job and in their career, I just get tickled. I share it with the whole team. Everybody gets to read it, and it just, it makes the internet such a better place when people are kind and appreciate the hard work you put in rather than focusing on all the faults. Because nothing's ever perfect. And yes, my courses are imperfect and could always be better, and I know this. And I always love constructive criticism. I take it to heart, but negative criticism, I don't know how anyone as a celebrity does it, because even the few negative things I get are hard to read because I do care a lot. And whenever I get internet YouTube comments that are just super negative or something like that, it's just like you try to shrug it off, but can't help but think about it, and you want to be better. All right. Let's see. Next up. Hi, Bret. If you need to upgrade your Swarm or Kubernetes cluster observability, which set of tools do you think is better? I saw something with Elastic Stack. So yes, there's lots of tools out there. The real first question you need to ask yourself is, do you have money or do you have time? Most people don't have both. So if you're a business and this is for business use, then you might have money, just a little bit of money. I'm not talking about a lot of money, just a little bit of money that you can do something like Datadog or New Relic or Sysdig or Papertrail or log entries or AWS CloudWatch, which does stuff for free or almost completely free if you're on AWS. So there's all these tools out there Many of them you will find in the landscape for, let's see, landscape.cncf.io. So if you go to landscape.cncf.io, you can look for logging and monitoring solutions. The reason I'm not jumping in with everyone in the chat and just saying Prometheus is because Prometheus to run, if you're only one person and you've got to do this for business, Prometheus is a lot of work. You're probably going to need at least a dozen containers to have a fully functioning Prometheus system. And for a business that's maybe a small business that doesn't have hundreds of containers and a 3-person team that's focused exclusively on container stuff, doing Prometheus may be too much work for you. It may be a lot of effort to simply get, and by the way, Prometheus is only one half of the puzzle. It doesn't do the logging. It only does the monitoring of metrics. So then you need something like Elasticsearch with the ELK stack for logging. And so that solution would need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6, maybe 12 containers for the logging solution. And all these things need to be configured and taken care of and updated and monitored. So it is there are companies of a medium size where it is 1 or 2 people's full-time jobs to simply take care of the monitoring solution and the logging solution. That's all they do. So I'm very sensitive to just saying, go do this open source because it's the best thing out there. There is no single solution best thing for everyone, right? So I would recommend that you consider first, do I have a little bit of money? Do I have a few $100s a month or less to use a cheaper monitoring and logging platform? A lot of times these are separate solutions, monitoring and logging. Sometimes they're together in one solution. Datadog is one that now does both, and they're fairly comprehensive. But even Datadog, while it can be expensive, it's free for 3 servers, I think, or 5 servers. And Datadog will provide that complete solution, but you've got to learn it. So I don't want to hand wave over you've got to learn these tools. They're complicated. And to be able to set metrics that meet your requirements and alert you at the appropriate time, but don't alert you too often, because there's this thing in the industry we call alert fatigue, which is it happens to all of us. You set up a new monitoring and a new logging solution. You set up a bunch of alerts for the things you think you need to know, and then your inbox is full every day. You wake up in the morning, 20 new alerts. You leave work at the end of the day, you look back at the end of the night, 20 new alerts. Like, it takes a lot of effort to hone just a single cluster of Kubernetes or Swarm, to hone that thing down to where it's only alerting you when things are really bad, and you don't get alerts when it's not really that important and you can probably deal with it tomorrow, you know? So anyway, it's a hard problem to solve. I would say that looking at the landscape, and definitely in terms of which open source projects are popular, Prometheus is definitely one of the big ones for open source monitoring. And then ELK, that primarily uses Elasticsearch, doesn't always use the L and the K, depend on it. The L stands for Logstash, and you don't always use Logstash, but that's like kind of the driver that you get your logs out of your cluster, and you put it into Elasticsearch for storing it. And then you need a dashboard, which is the K. But anyway, those things are fine. Other people in here I see are posting in opinions. There are lots of opinions out there. I don't have a preference. I mean, if someone made me and they said, hey, we're not allowed to spend any money, but hey, you've got 10 new hours a week of free time, you need to run your own logging and monitoring solution, I would probably use ELK and Prometheus. So if you're on Swarm, by the way, just go to GitHub and search around for Prometheus example, or like Prometheus Kubernetes or Prometheus Swarm, and you'll find on GitHub not just the open source projects, but you'll find examples and usable repos where people have taken a bunch of these tools together and created a easy deployable solution. One of those for Swarm, for example, is SwarmProm. which is a great one from Stefan, and he's a big open source creator and supporter. And here under Swarm Prom, basically this repo, because there's so much stuff out there for Kubernetes, it can sometimes get lost in trying to find Swarm solutions. But this is an example. This is a solution where he brought all the tools that you need, ways to notify you in Slack and email and stuff like that, ways to set alerts so that you will get an alert for a certain thing, like over 80% CPU usage for 5 minutes or something. Plus the things like you need in front of these tools that will protect you, like logins, web authentication, getting all of the metrics out of the servers, right? So you can see here that this one alone has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different open source tools all bundled into one just to deliver you monitoring. And that's it. Not logging, just monitoring. So I'm always very careful with people quickly offering a solution. It usually requires a conversation to say, hey, let's talk about your needs and what you have. Do you have time or money? Because not everyone has time. And these open source solutions will definitely take you a lot of time. You're going to pay one way or the other. So it depends on what you have. All right, on to the next questions. And yes, thank you to everyone in chat giving your thoughts and your opinions for these questions. It's great that we're having a conversation about this. Yes. Hey, Bret, do you recommend attending to KubeCon and Cloud Native Conference 2020 if I just recently began the path for Docker, Kubernetes, and DevOps architecture? Well, sure. Juan, I would say that it's no better time than now to attend online virtual conferences. They're either free or very cheap. So if you went to a real KubeCon, it would take thousands of American dollars or more to go to a KubeCon. With the online version, it's less than $100. So at least that's what they did for the KubeCon EU. I'm assuming for KubeCon Cloud and Cloud Native Conf here in the fall, that will be still like $60 or $70. If you don't want to go to the conference and you don't want to pay that money, if you just wait a few weeks, all those videos will be up on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube and you go to CNCF, I'm not sure if it's under CNCF or under the Linux Foundation. I'm going to search KubeCon 2020 EU. I'm just going to let me search that. Yeah, here we go. So, playlists. Yeah, so Europe Virtual. So this is a full playlist of what I'm going to assume is like 314 videos, right? So let me just put this into chat. So this is 314 videos from KubeCon EU. Now, here's a little thing about KubeCon. A lot of conferences will allow you to speak at their different conferences in the real world multiple times, which means that if I went to, KubeCon is not a good example. We'll talk about that in a second. KubeCon, if it wasn't KubeCon, let's say it's a different conference. Let's say it's BretCon. And there's a BretCon in New York and a BretCon in London and a BretCon in San Francisco and one in China or whatever. You could potentially speak at all of those. So it may not be worth going to all of them if you can already watch the videos from one online. The unfortunate thing about conferences is the real reason you go to a physical conference in the real world is for the people. I always spend most of my time at those real conferences seeing my friends, meeting new people, going to any social events that I can possibly meet new people through my friends. And if you don't know anyone at these events, then they usually have really great ice-breaking or networking events that I have always enjoyed. They sometimes they call them like speed dating, essentially, where you hop tables every 5 minutes and you basically talk to someone for 5 minutes. You kind of share what you're doing, they share what they're doing, and then you hop to the next table. I really like that stuff because that's where you find your community and you find people. These conference talks you can watch online. Almost every conference posts their videos online afterwards. So this is in 300 plus videos from their event that was just a month ago. And they're going to have another event in 2 months. So there's not going to be a terrible amount of new things in the next KubeCon. So if I was going to have to go to one in the real world, I might even opt out of it. I'm hopefully going to speak at it. We actually declined to run a workshop at the EU one because we thought maybe we would be able to do it in physical, but obviously now with the way things are, we're not going to be able to do it in physical. So we're going to do we're asked again to do a virtual workshop on the difference between Docker and Containerd when you're using Kubernetes. And it was basically an intro to how to use Containerd when you're using it for your Kubernetes runtime. And hopefully we're going to find out actually, I think next week, if it's accepted. So yes, I would say KubeCon is worth it, but you can also watch all these videos. I mean, I haven't even watched a 10th% of these, right? There's so many to watch. So go check those out. Let's see. Do you recommend? Okay, I already answered that one. Which technology do I have to learn, including Docker and Kubernetes? Of course. I don't know, Peter. I don't know anything about you. I don't know what you're trying to achieve. I would say that if you're going for cloud native DevOps, then I would learn another cloud. I would learn a cloud, just one cloud for now, maybe AWS to start with. I would learn Terraform, and then I would learn a CI tool, maybe Jenkins, maybe something like Circle CI. I would learn a CI/CD tool, and that way you have a single tool in the whole pipeline. So you understand, and obviously GitHub. So you understand GitHub for how to store code. You understand AWS for how to do things in the cloud. You understand Terraform for how to automate the creating and managing of things in the cloud. You understand how to automate containers through CI/CD and automate testing. You understand how to create containers and manage containers through Docker. And then you learn how to automate container platforms with Kubernetes, right? So if you learn all those tools at a very basic level, you become very useful to a team that doesn't know any of these things. Even if you're not a super expert in any one of them, you will be useful to a team that is just now stepping into the world of cloud native container DevOps. All right. Biker, where do I register for BretCon? We'll see. We'll see if that could happen. It sounds like a very, I think you're attending BretCon right now. This is BretCon. It's an hour every week, and it goes on forever. It never ends. It's BretCon Infinity. All right. So let's see. We use Notion internally at my company for internal knowledge base. Yes. Cool, Gil. Pixel matters. Nice. Yeah, I love Notion, and I'm always looking for ways to use it more. It's a great tool. Is there a way to force an image layer to not build from cache without changing the contents of the Docker file when doing a compose up build? Is there a way to force an image layer to not build from cache? So you can do, not when you're doing Kyle, I want my containers to always install the most up-to-date version of NPM packages without having to specify version. Okay, well, first off, Kyle, I will say that I don't advise that, first of all. Containers are supposed to be deterministic, and so you need to have versions in your container images. If you're working on a business production thing, I highly don't recommend you doing it that way. You might have your own reasons for that, so I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I would say that the default and the recommended way for standard container usage is that everything is pinned. Everything is pinned. So your NPM file versions, your package versions are pinned because you need to be able to rely that when you build it and someone else builds it, that you end up with the exact same thing. That's what the goal is of Docker files. Now, if you're trying to use what I would call an edge case, where you don't necessarily need that, and you're not looking for that functionality of reliability and consistency, then certainly Docker can help you with that. But to avoid the cache, so Docker Compose build has a no cache option. Okay, so you would maybe have to do a build before the up. If I remember correctly, the up. Yeah, there is no cache, no cache option on up. It is only on build. So you would need to. It would be 2 commands, and of course you could put double ampersand those together, and then you would have a one line command there. So Docker Compose build -- no cache ampersand Docker Compose up. That would be the way to do that. I've seen on the GitHub issues where people have requested the no cache option on up, but basically the team's attitude is, look, it's just 2 commands instead of 1, not a terrible inconvenience, and they're not interested in adding the no cache option to up, essentially, because it's. I'll be honest, I work with teams and people every day for the last 5 years, and no cache is extremely rare. In other words, people use no cache when they think they need it, but they don't actually need it. There's a better solution than no cache. So anyway, I'm sure you have opinions about that. I'm not sure if you're still around, Kyle, but that's my answer. Hopefully it helps. Avery says, I hear you say that every time you SSH into a host, a panda dies. I need to put this on the internet, on Twitter or something, because I'm sure I've said that in a course or something, but it's funny to hear you say that I say that. But does that also apply to CD automation when we use Docker context in our pipeline? Webhooks only? Oh, okay. So when I specify, that's a great question. I know what you're asking. You're asking, is SSH bad? No. Is a human manually SSHing into a server to control it? Yes. Because that implies that you aren't using higher level tooling that would automate that. For example, Docker and Kubernetes command line tools can talk remotely against a server. Thus, there's no need to SSH into it as a human first. It's not that SSH is bad. I love SSH. I'm SSH'd every day. I have this fantastic SSH on my iPad called what is it called? Why can't I remember what this app is called? Blink. The Blink shell. All right, the Blink shell is amazing on iPad. You should totally get it. You should pay the $10 or whatever. It is the best shell. I've bought all the others, and Blink is the best. Anyway, so no, SSH is the bomb, but there is a time and place for SSH, and the days of us SSHing into servers and then doing a Docker run are over, because now you can set a little environment variable on your machine, and you can just do Docker host equals SSH, and then the IP address or the name of the host, and you can control one remotely. Or you can just set that environment variable or use the Docker context command. Okay? So the Docker context command allows me to set other servers up remotely, and I can use SSH as the way to tunnel into those servers. So that's way different, because whenever you SSH into a server, that means you need to now have your tools on the server. You might need your YAML files on that server, and you don't want that. You want them locally on your machine, and you want the servers to be just a thing that can go away, right? There's nothing special about it. It's not your machine. You didn't customize it. It's just a generic machine. And the minute you have to SSH in, that to me implies that maybe you've installed your custom Vim on it. Maybe you've done a Git clone of a repo with all of your stuff in it. Like, I don't want you to do that on a server. I would rather you do that on your machine. Now, if you're using a server as your like remote admin thing, then great. Some people have jump hosts or unique servers that they put all their tooling on that they manage all the systems from. That's totally fine too. You can totally do that. It's the idea that we're individually managing servers from the command line manually on each server. That's what's going away. All right. So great question, and as usual, a long answer. Gil says, today I did a talk at my company about all the history on containers. Congratulations. Congratulations. Good job doing a talk. I advise all of you, by the way, to do a talk at your job. Whatever you're passionate about, whatever you're excited about, go and stand up in front of your peers and do a little lunch presentation. Well, we're not really all at the office anymore, but do one on Zoom or whatever with your friends that you work with, or your teammates, right? That's how I got started, and that's being able to do keynotes and speaking to 1,000 people in a conference room. Like, you don't go from nothing to there, right? And it's super fun. I've always enjoyed it, and I'm always so nervous before I ever talk to people, even if it's just 10 people. But I started 15 years ago or more just by talking to my teammates and doing little lunch and learns, we used to call them. And so I always advise that. I think it's a great way to build confidence. It also will always cause you to learn something, because if you're like me, before you get up in front of people and talk, you feel like you got to really know the topic. So then you always end up learning something along the way. So good job, Gil. All right. Can you please share your Notion template? I am new to Notion. All right, I don't even have Notion templates that I would recommend anyone else use, because they're all really super hyper specific and not really ready for sharing. But I will give you something. Let's see. Her name is Mary. I'm sorry, Marie. Marie Pullen. All right, I'm going to put her in chat. So this is a friend of mine that makes a course on Notion. So if you're at all getting into Notion, one of the other big things I love about Notion is that you can type in Markdown and it works. Oh yes, you can also put in code snippets and bash script snippets and stuff like that. There's so much you can do in Notion that I love as a developer and sysadmin. I put all of my commonly used commands in there that I might need to remember later. If I'm doing something on a server manually or something locally manually, like some weird Mac thing that I've got to troubleshoot and it requires editing some P lists or doing certain commands, I will always log that stuff in Notion. So for later, I have that stuff so that I can remember it. I used to use Evernote, but then Evernote started to suck. So I stopped using Evernote. And now the only thing I use Evernote for is historical. And I now put everything new in Notion. So go check out Marie's course. Ironically, it's called Notion Mastery. I'm not sure if she got that idea from me, but she is one of the leaders on Notion expertise. She has her own YouTube channel, and she gives away a lot of stuff for free. So check out her resources. She has a weekly email that's great. She does live shows, I think once a week, if not more. And she works with the Notion staff on a lot of things there. So she is definitely the expert. And she has a lot of stuff. So go check her out if you're into Notion. How can Prometheus probes can be attached to containers and Swarm? I would say go check out the Swarm prom that I just showed up earlier from Stefan. Swarm prom. Go check that out. And I think all of the things you need are in there for how to get it to see individual containers and services and the Docker API. All right. Jatin, on the blog link for containers and images, I don't have that blog post up yet, but if you sign up for my Patreon, if you just go down in my Patreon page and click the follow, you'll get every new piece of content I create. So every blog post, every newsletter, it's probably once or twice a week. It's not very often. And they're quick little notifications or emails. You don't have to pay at all for it. Just click the follow button and check out me there. And then you'll know when I post it. What are the advantages of Docker when it comes to machine learning? I would say machine learning is no different than any other workload. It is simply a way for you to take repetitive things and spin them up easier and faster. It allows you to replace things faster, basically ship code and ship stuff easier and better than before. So I would say that machine learning is really just a type of workload, and Docker is pretty advantageous on every workload I've ever seen. So it's hard to find something that is worse on Docker in terms of the entire experience, from bundling up code with its dependencies, then getting that to my server, and then spinning it up on my server, and then replacing it on my server often. Like all those things are better. So Biker says no more hidden gems. Yeah, and that's because I talk forever and I go on tangents, and I apologize. I apologize for hiding nuggets of information and speaking quickly and not having all of this I wish I needed someone I did need to hire someone just to do the Cliff Notes version of all the gems and put that in a printed format and then sell it for a few bucks extra or something. I need to do that, and I don't have it. So, because I bet you that I would learn something from my own Cliff Notes. I would probably remind myself of things I said 3 years ago. Share your experiences on writing your technology articles and posting it on the internet. I am horrible at writing. I can barely grasp the English language, and it's the only language I know. And I really wish I didn't have to do it. I'm so much better at talking than writing. For instance, that one blog post has been taking me over a week to do, and I work on it every day. So that's how bad I am at writing, which is probably why it's been 4 months since I've written a newsletter. Yeah. Videos are a lot easier for me than writing, so. What is the best resource to get acquainted with most important tools for Kubernetes? I mean, I would say my courses, but beyond that, you're probably talking about something in addition to my courses. I would say it's not. I don't know. I'm not so sure that it's the tools for Kubernetes, because if you don't have a problem, why go looking for a solution? I think for a lot of people, they will know when they need something for Kubernetes or for Docker, for example, when they feel a pain point. The problem with Kubernetes is there's so many tools now in the industry that you could easily end up with a very complicated, very fragile Kubernetes cluster because you've added in a couple dozen different tools that you maybe didn't even really need. So I would say, first learning Kubernetes, learn how to get it deployed in an automated way, whether that's through kubeadmin or Rancher or, EKS, like the EKS CTL tool, or, some sort of automated tool so that you can easily deploy and manage Kubernetes. How do you upgrade Kubernetes? Can you easily do that? What dashboard are you going to use? Are you going to use the standard Kubernetes dashboard or one of the alternatives? How are you going to back it up? Are you going to use one of those tools? There's only a few of them that I know of that are open source. So I would say focus on those essentials. I would not say that you immediately need to go do Helm, because I think a lot of people immediately assume that the next thing they have to learn is Helm, when depending on your complexity and the size of your organization, you may not need it. You may be able to get away with just Kustomize or just simple YAML templating using some external tool that's not even Kubernetes specific, because YAML is just YAML, and you can use a lot of other tools that already template YAML. I think Helm can be a little in excess if you don't need all of the Helm charts that you might think you need. So I think eventually If you end up with a 3-person team and hundreds and hundreds of containers, then probably Helm is a good solution to look at. But I wouldn't say that I need it on day 2 of a small little cluster. Can I explain my Flexi Swarm architecture diagram that I have been showing going production like a pro slides and describe the components in it? I see load balancers and a cache maybe. When their focus is on creating app code and my team will be handling the Docker files and clusters, I want to push the shift left agenda, but at an appropriate pace. Docker is very new to my organization, and I plan to teach some of the DevOps team about Docker and Docker administration. How important is it for the application developers to understand Docker? I would say all of those things are true. So I definitely think you need to be bringing your developers on board. When you first learn Docker, and I think everyone in the dev and ops worlds needs to learn Docker because they need to understand container tooling. Just like 15 years ago, we all started to learn virtualization. If you can imagine, I mean, 20 years ago, very few people had virtualization, and people didn't understand what it was. I had to go into a room of people, and we had to explain the idea of an OS in an OS as a foreign concept to the brain. And we had to use mainframe analogies, and we were like holding up hardware and explaining how is it that I can see the hardware from inside the hardware of an OS? Like it was very hard for people to initially understand virtualization, but we taught everyone in tech and in the entire enterprise. We had 300 people in IT. So we had a room of maybe 50 people in there at once, and we were explaining virtualization before we did VMware. And that same thing has to happen for containers. People that are in project manager level jobs or even IT manager level jobs, it's the same thing with starting to do DevOps. People at the different levels need to understand the basics. So what I would do is I'd start out with a 101 and make it just a 3-hour thing or a 2-hour thing, or maybe even just a 1 hour. And you'd maybe only give them a couple of examples, and they're not even typing yet. Maybe in the lunch time thing, you're giving them the concepts. And I have a video called Why Docker that goes into the why does Docker exist without going to the command line, which is meant for everyone, executives, mid-level managers, and those people need to understand the why. And then once you get to developers and operators, you need to understand the how. And that's when you need to go to the command line. So yes, I absolutely think that you should be inviting those developers. I recently did, for a large government agency that has multiple agencies within that agency, I recently did a workshop this year where they invited everyone to my workshop because it was online and virtual, and we had I think 70 people at some point and it was a day-long thing for 3 days. So people were jumping in and out all day long as they could make it, and I was recording it the whole time. So then they got the recordings broken up into half-day videos, and it was taking them all the way from the day one of Docker all the way through, building containers, building container images, running containers, doing networking. And then we jumped into the Kubernetes and the basics of Kubernetes, deploying applications on Kubernetes, and learning some of the more advanced commands in Kubernetes and how to use YAML. We did all that stuff. And then the very last day we dedicated to nothing but their environment. So they did nothing but Q&A for 8 hours, where they asked the same questions you're asking today. They asked, well, how do I do this in Python? Well, how does this work when we have 3 servers over here and 2 servers over? They asked every question they could imagine. And I didn't have all the answers, but I did the best I could to help them conceptually, align the cells to deal with this new idea. And I think that's really important in every organization. So I can't understate how, go slow, offer it more than once because not everybody can make it. Offer it a couple of times if you can, Avery. And then, if you've got specific questions that you want to ask in here on specific tooling in that stack of architecture, I can get back into those. But I'm a big fan of training everyone, overtraining, not undertraining. So many organizations undertrain. It's easy to undertrain. You do nothing. And then you have a bunch of people that don't know how to use stuff. And if you want to get people on board with containers, you have to educate. So I bring in the security people first. I bring them in when I'm doing my Docker 101. When I did this government training, we had security people on the call. I didn't even know it. I didn't even know that they were security people. And people started asking me about security stuff. And I started saying things like, bring your security team into these chats early, like have them come in early and understand how it works and understand and start asking the questions that security needs to ask so that they will at least comprehend. Because if you just throw this at them when you're ready to go live and you say, okay, everything's great. Okay, security, now tell us what's wrong. It's not going to go well. It's going to be a problem. So ironically, they were on the call and they spoke up. They actually, because they all had a mic, they all started talking and they said, yeah, we're here and we're listening. And yes, you should definitely bring us in early to the conversation. We would love to learn more about Docker. And so that's why I'm glad they were there. Marcos, I have a new job. Congratulations on the new job. And we need to decide on the whole tech stack. And you're going to buy my Docker for Node course. I think that's a great idea. Thank you so much for supporting my courses. So make sure that you've taken Docker Mastery first, and then take Docker for Node.js, because the Docker for Node.js builds on the basics of Docker. Maybe not so much the Kubernetes Swarm stuff, but the Docker stuff, the Docker Compose. You need to have those drilled in before you do Docker for Node.js. Thanks, Owen. You're in for BretCon. I think I'm in trouble. I've invented a thing that I don't have the time to do. I don't know how you get KubeCon slides. I assume that if you paid for KubeCon EU that the slides were available, but I didn't actually download any. So, David, does single node swarm make sense for full stack application, or would you recommend using Compose only? I never recommend Compose in production. And instead of telling you all the reasons why, I will give you a link. So, David, here you go. Compose or Swarm. It's a link that will give you all the reasons why I believe a single node Swarm makes much more sense than a single node Compose. Single node Compose cannot do rolling updates without downtime. It does not have health checks. It cannot replace a failed container. It cannot store secrets. It cannot scale to 2 nodes from 1 just in case you suddenly now need a second node, because Compose only understands 1 machine. It's a developer tool. It's meant for developer ideas. It doesn't have any of these concepts of ops built into it, so it doesn't know those production-like ideas. And it doesn't have a database behind it, so it can't store secrets or store configuration or whatever. So, yeah, Swarm versus Compose. I mean, obviously, if you only have a single server, you have a single point of failure in hardware, but a lot of us don't need that, right? We don't for small projects, we don't need that. We all have somewhere in our companies and personal lives, we have a single machine running a single application somewhere. So in those cases, I recommend Swarm. It comes with Docker, and it still uses the same Compose file, but it gives you a whole bunch of extra features for essentially free. So why not? BretCon via YouTube, Twitch, but we miss out on the speed dating with Bret. I mean, aren't we speed dating right now? Like, you guys are chatting and asking questions, and I'm answering them. I'm not asking questions, I guess, so it's a little one-sided. Which templating framework do you recommend? We tried JSONnet for the last 1 year, but now we want to move to Helm, but Helm has not much control like JSONnet. I don't actually know JSON, if that's how you say it, JSONnet. I don't actually know that tool. Handlebars, any Handlebars tools, I would be a fan of. I use Handlebars for front-end development when I have to, and I'm not an expert, but mustache brackets. I would say use the tool that your team already knows. If you're a developer team, you probably already have some sort of front-end templating tool or static site generating templating tool, those tools are usually using the same language or the same, I guess, parameters in the file for templating that you can use in JSON. And the kube control command line, unless you use the customize option, the K customize option, the Kubernetes command line does not support YAML templating, but there's no reason why you can't just use a standard YAML templating to spit out a pre-formatted template YAML use the YAML templating tool that then spits it out to Kubernetes in a way that Kubernetes can understand it. That's essentially what Kustomize is doing in the background. If you've looked into Kustomize, it just happens to be built in to the Kubernetes tooling, but it's there for convenience, not because it's the only way to do it. But I don't really have a favorite. I tend to apply the favorite of whatever team I'm working with, and whatever they prefer, because they might be Python programmers or Node.js programmers or PHP programmers or .NET programmers. So they're going to have their own tooling that they might prefer for their YAML templating. How can I delete a PVC that is being mounted by 4 active pods? I don't believe you do. And I don't know that you'd want to, John. So I'm not really sure what is the safe use case there. There are some things that are prevented. Kubernetes does allow you to do some things that Swarm doesn't allow you to do, because Swarm is sort of safety first. Kubernetes sometimes allows you to step on your own foot and delete things that you shouldn't. I have not tried to delete a PVC that's active on pods, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't go well. So the answer for me is honestly, I don't know. And good luck. Sorry, I don't have the answer to that one. What would be a Swarm prom equivalent for K8s? I would look maybe at operators, like look at Operator Hub for Prometheus. I mean, if you're saying Swarm prom is just a bundled version of Prometheus for Swarm. For Kubernetes, you would just need to look at a bundled Prometheus for Kubernetes. And the way that usually comes down is in a set of CRDs or an operator. So go to Operator Hub. I don't have like a preferred one. I actually don't deploy a lot of Prometheus for business, because they much prefer to not run their own monitoring. They'd rather pay for a low price monitoring solution, or just use a cloud's built-in provided one. For example, now AWS has Container Insights that allows you to see a bunch of metrics on your containers specifically for things like EKS, right? In ECS. But so you have Prometheus Operator by Red Hat, metering, exporter. Yeah, so it looks like there's a bunch of Red Hat stuff there. That's what I would look into. If you wanted a sort of bundled solution, I'm sure that there's stuff on GitHub, but I don't know of any, so I hope that helps. Do I have details for how I set up my terminal on my Mac? Yes. It's a common question in my courses, and I recommend you go to bretfisher.com/shell, and that will give you all my shell tooling. It's not a walkthrough, but it is a link to each tool and modification and how I do it, how I change the colors, how I change my fonts, what versions of Vim I use, all that stuff. All right? What else? Thanks, Peter. Peter was faster at answering my question about my website than I am, so I appreciate that. Gil says, "Oh, the first time you did a talk in English, a huge step." Huge, considering I've never done a talk in another language, so I can't even imagine my first talk in that language. That would be amazing. So good job, and for standing up and being willing to speak in front of other people using a different language, that's a huge hurdle. That's great. Curious if using run mount type SSH is still experimental in Dockerfile. I believe so, and it bugs me too, right, Peter? Because you think that the experimental, to me at this point, the experimental has been there for years, and they've only tweaked it and fixed bugs. So I don't really think of it as experimental anymore. I mean, I recommend it to clients when they need those kind of features, and I've not had one come back at me with a negative situation. So I don't know of any bugs that I've experienced using those experimental features. So I recommend it. Yeah, do it. Moz, what is Notion? It's a note-taking app. It's a note-taking app. Notion.so. So just go check that out. Notion.so. It's great. It's what I use every day. It's what my whole company uses. It's where all of our information, project management. It replaced like 5 tools in my computer. So it's pretty great. It was worth the $8 a month, or whatever I pay for it. So, do I advise Portainer 2 for Kubernetes management? And what about Swarm on Kubernetes? Bret at Hotel California. I have not used Portainer 2 yet, but Portainer 1 was great. So I do not know about it for Kubernetes management. I would immediately compare it to the Kubernetes dashboard and see what the pros and cons are. You can run both. So just run both side by side and compare them and see which one is more useful to you. The thing is with these tools is that you can easily swap them out. I mean, dashboards are pretty, the only thing about dashboards that might get complicated is when you have to create user accounts and if they need some sort of storage backend or something. But there's at least 3 or 4 different Kubernetes dashboards out there. There are also dashboards that don't even require a web interface. There's Lens, Kubernetes Lens, which I will give you. So Kubernetes Lens is a local application GUI on your computer so that you don't have to put it in the cluster. And then there is also Infra, another great one. Infra.app. So this is made by some of the people that used to work at Docker, making the GUIs at Docker. They're working on a new one called Infra. It's pretty cool. And then there's Lens. I don't know if there's a Kubernetes Lens, which is a desktop app. So you don't even have to use web GUIs anymore. And I'll tell you that these desktop apps are getting pretty fancy. They're getting pretty good. So you might consider those instead of putting a permanent web dashboard on your cluster, because web dashboards take up extra resources and may be a security risk. So it just depends. I mean, I have web dashboards. I like them. I'm just saying you might try both and consider which ones you might like. Or K9s, like Ronald says. K9s, which is a CLI dashboard, right? Yeah. So K9s, I don't think might not have shown this off, is a dashboard for your command line. And this is pretty cool because I can pick which cluster I want to look at. So I can look at this one. And then I can see I've only got 2 containers running on it. So anyway, that's a staging cluster. So maybe a bad example. There's not a lot of stuff running on there yet, but it's a new cluster I'm building for my website. And yeah, it's called K9s or Kynes, maybe. Kynes. I don't know how you would. I say K9s because I spell everything out, but let's see what they. I'm not sure if they say how to say it. Yeah. So canines. Yeah. Um, Service mesh from scratch. For books, well, I think there's an Istio book. I would go and look at, let's see, Meshery. So go look at Meshery if you're interested in service mesh. It's kind of a community run by a friend of mine, Lee, that they're all about understanding service meshes and basically running performance tests against them. And actually, Meshery may not be, let's see. Layer 5. Layer 5 is the community. Meshery is the tool. Sorry, Layer 5. So Layer 5 is a community of people led by my friend Lee, a Docker captain, who also... so they have books here on Istio that they're recommending, as well as what's the landscape look like, what are the tools. So I would start here because it's basically a bunch of people that don't have an agenda. Their agenda is to educate and help each other. They do weekly meetups, I believe, or monthly meetups or something. So I would definitely do that. Meshery is a tool that they created to create performance metrics and standards around service mesh so that you could compare tools based on their performance. Is there a free hosted rancher or pertainer anywhere? I miss Tudum. I'm not aware of any, Six Corners, sorry. Not aware of any. Terraform versus AWS CloudFormation. I just had this discussion with a client the other day. Terraform. No question. I used to use CloudFormation back when it was JSON only. Then they created YAML for it, so that was good. But at some point, you're going to need to create a thing that is not on AWS. Then you don't have a tool. And at some point, you're going to get tired of the verbosity of CloudFormation, and you're going to wish you had a slightly higher level tool that wasn't so much YAML. And that is Terraform. Plus, Terraform has the advantages of working everywhere. So why not Terraform first? There might be some tiny little edge cases where things are supported in CloudFormation for brand new stuff or really advanced stuff that's not yet fully baked in Terraform, but I don't run into that, so I have no problem saying Terraform every day of the week. The thing I would say there, though, is you do need to do some understanding of AWS CloudFormation and how it works. So if you're simply learning, start with AWS CloudFormation, do some things, create a server, create a RDS database, create some security groups, create some network ACLs, do some of that basics just so you understand what it's doing. And then jump to Terraform and learn how to do it that way and compare, right? Just do something very simple. Create one server, one database, one security group, one elastic IP address and load balancer, just like do the basics, do that in CloudFormation only, and then learn how to do it in Terraform. You should be able to do that in less than a day. And then compare. Because I think, let's just say this. Everyone that I know that starts with CloudFormation eventually moves to Terraform. Unless they have a mandate that everyone has to use CloudFormation only, and that they're AWS only, and that they're not allowed to use something like Terraform. So anyway, what are my thoughts on using micro K8s in production? Latest update allows micro K8s to run in HA. So it's getting better. The HA is brand new, and ironically, recently, one of the maintainers reached out to me, and I told him I want him on the show. So we're going to have one of the Micro K8s team members on the show. I haven't scheduled a date yet. Thanks for reminding me. I'm actually going to bring that up. But they reached out to me and asked me what I thought about the new HA. I admitted that I had not tried it and that I think the tool is great. I use it every day, but I have not considered it for production. But I'm happy to give it a shot. So thanks for that reminder there. I'm going to go look at this message and now I got to find this. Yeah, I got to figure out this guy. I forgot his name. Ah, it's Alex. Yeah, so I'm gonna reach out to Alex, and then if you're on my Patreon, if you go to Patreon and click the follow button, you don't have to pay for anything. Click the follow button. You will hear when we schedule guests. So, for example, I'm scheduling a guest next week to talk about the GitOps Argo CD platform. A friend of mine, Victor, Docker captain, and he's going to be on, and we're going to talk about that and his new job. And you will hear about that coming up on Patreon because we're going to send out an announcement. Let's see. What is your preferred secrets management tool? Docker Swarm Secrets or HashiCorp Vault? Peter, if you're still on with over there on Periscope, Twitter, I only use Vault when I have to, which is rarely. Luckily, when I work with teams, it's usually a security-focused person that's going to implement Vault or someone who's dealing with hybrid solutions. I always use secrets, and I always use those, in Kubernetes and Swarm first. I use the right tool for the job. Vault, to me, is only when required. And because, think about it, Vault is another tool I have to deploy and learn and manage and monitor because that thing can't go down. It has to be super secure, and I need to make it super protected, and it needs to be backed up. There's just all these requirements to it. So why do that in addition to the secret store I already have? So when I'm working with clients, we will start with using the one in the orchestrator built in. And then when they start to have limits, like let's say they need secrets outside of Kubernetes or Swarm, then that's maybe when they need to look at something like AWS secrets or something like Vault. If they're going hybrid or data center, cross cloud, that kind of thing, then Vault makes sense. Vault is great, but it is work. So I try to avoid unnecessary work. Hello, I'm your student. How to use Docker commands with Azure container instances. I mean, we can do it using ACI, but they have Azure commands. So I'm not sure if are you talking about the new Docker ACI plugin? Because the Docker command line now has a beta for being able to talk directly to ACI. Did you know that? Look back on my show at Bret.live. Oops, over there. Bret.live. Earlier this summer, we talked about Docker ACI Azure. So the Docker team is currently in beta testing a ACI feature, and they just added some new functionality to the beta. But you should go check that out because I am not an ACI expert, but Docker is trying to make it super easy to do a Docker compose up essentially against ACI. And it'll auto create ACI and then allow you to control it. So go check that out. Great question. Talking about security, do you also recommend Alpine-based images as Debian ones have a lot of them? Recently, we moved all our Node.js services to Alpine-based Node images. This is a complicated topic, and I am not all in on Alpine. I use Alpine a lot. About once a quarter, the Alpine-based images break for me, and it's been doing that for years. So while I appreciate the higher security posture of Alpine, if you were to come to me as a client and you were to ask me about Node.js, I would say use Node.js Slim image, not the default, but Slim. It's almost as tiny as Alpine. It's, instead of hundreds of megs. Or I mean, I think that it's a huge difference. If you go back to my DockerCon 2019 talk, I talk a little bit about this in my Docker 2019. That's over a year ago, though, so my opinions have changed somewhat since then. But at DockerCon 2019, I went into the sizes of these images for Node.js, and I said, look, size is not the only factor. Obviously, security is, and the default image is for convenience only. I don't tend to use the default images in production because they're very large and they have lots of unnecessary tooling. When it comes to something like Node.js, you often don't need that default Debian image because besides the security and the size of it, you simply don't need all those tools because Node.js often doesn't need to compile binaries. So if you didn't know it, the default images for languages in Docker, languages meaning Python, Java, Node.js, PHP, Ruby, all Golang, all these default images tend to come with binary building tools in them, like build essentials from Linux, things that can build, have make for make files and other utilities. That requires a whole sort of different things. So most people do not need those in production images. So what I do is I work with people on multi-stage images, and we may use a big image to start with that has all their dev tools, right? All of their, it's bloated. It may be a gig or 2 in size. I've worked with Node.js images that are almost 2 gig in size. And then for production, we copy just the source code and the node modules into a slim image. The only time I will use an Alpine image is if there is a specific security requirement that the slim image does not meet. Because over the last, let's just say 3 years, about once a quarter, there will be a problem, even some problems specifically with Node.js in using Alpine. This quarter, what was it? There was a feature in Node.js that broke. I'm sorry, there's a feature in Alpine that broke. And it broke some of my auto builds because my applications were no longer able to build because Alpine changed something. And it was a bug. At the beginning of the year, they broke the NS lookup utility, and they didn't fix it for 6 months. I think they fixed it and it broke again. This is not so much the fault of Alpine. The Alpine community is great. I love the community, security-focused, minimal Linux. When you talk about container images, Alpine is built on top of something that is not the same thing as an Alpine server. When you do an Alpine standard Linux server, you get a very standard Linux set of tooling when you install Alpine. When you're doing the container imaging, it's built on something, and my brain is not working at the moment. Someone in chat's probably going to give me the reason for what I'm talking about. It's the 1 meg base image, and I can't remember what it's called. It's what Docker machine uses sometimes. Docker. Something box. Busy box, yes. Yeah, so you already know what I'm talking about. So busy box. And the busy box is often the problem because busy box is never, here's my opinion. Busy box was not designed to be a production tool. It's now being used as a production tool inside containers every day. But it was meant to be a very extremely floppy disk sized copy of Linux binaries. And the way it uses is it basically bundles them all together, and then it symlinks. I'm not sure if the symlink is the right word, but it basically links into the static binary, right? So that has a bunch of effects. And the interesting effects on that are, it's really hard to do security scanners on BusyBox because they can't read into the code. So there's a couple of different ways to take opinions on this. When you do security scanning, and if you're a security-minded person, you know that security scanners are an opinion because no two are the same. And if you ever talk to any security company, they will agree with you that a scanner gives you back an opinion of what it's thinking are risks. And 2 scanners will show you 2 different results, which is why it's often good to use 2 different scanners to compare. And that's true for CVE, not just other things besides CVE, but even CVEs are opinionated. So when you start talking about BusyBox, I'm not aware of a scanner that can scan inside of the compiled BusyBox libraries, which means curl is in BusyBox, for example. If there's a vulnerability in curl, is your scanner capable of detecting the vulnerability in the curl that's provided with BusyBox? I bet it's not. So a lot of people will criticize Debian-based images because there's more detection. But what they don't realize is that's because it's easier to detect, because there's this whole thing that has to happen in Linux where you have this middle, there's the Linux distribution and the files. Then there's a database that translates those files into what the scanner can find, because the scanner isn't scanning the bits of every different binary. It's looking for the files and libraries and determining their versions. That's all it's doing. So the way it does that is through a database. And that database has to be able to understand what it's reading. So a dirty little secret, but until a year and a half ago, Alpine didn't even have a good scanner in the marketplace. There was no good Alpine container image scanner that would correctly detect anything inside of APK. And I ranted about this on Twitter for years. In fact, my DockerCon 2019 talk, I did a lot of that. I basically said, hey, look, be careful. If you're on Alpine and you need to do security scanning because your security team requires it, you can't use Alpine because there's no good scanner. We now have 2 good scanners, at least 3 actually that I know of, and the marketplace is widening to all support Alpine, and so that's great. It's getting better. But I would argue that there are still unknown vulnerabilities in these binaries of BusyBox that these scanners can't detect. And when I look at Alpine, I think, yes, less files is better. But what are you sacrificing in doing so? Are you sacrificing visibility into the vulnerabilities? Are you sacrificing the issues I've had with production customers? Every quarter, we have a BusyBox or Alpine Linux problem where there's a new bug. A year and a half ago, Node.js had a problem where if you ever use the tool NodeMon, it broke in Alpine Linux only. And the reason it broke in Alpine Linux was because of the C libraries being different in Alpine. And the binaries broke for file I/O watching, and NodeMon had to work around that. And it took months to fix it. So this keeps happening. I'm not making this stuff up. So that doesn't happen to me on Debian. The reason I think it doesn't happen on Ubuntu or Debian is because those are extremely more popular, extremely more tested. They're in production every day, where Alpine Linux has this much of the community. Will it get better? Absolutely. Will these problems maybe work themselves out? Absolutely. I just want you to have full awareness of what you're choosing, because I think a lot of people jump on the Alpine bandwagon not having any awareness of some of these caveats. But I am an Alpine person myself. I love Alpine Linux. I hate to bring up any of the faults because it sounds like I'm, not a fan. I just want to use the right tool in the right place. If I'm not so concerned about passing a security audit or the number of CVEs in my container, I will always use Alpine because it's easy, it's small, it's fast. It's just not always the most stable, or arguably that much more secure than a slim image. Anyway, that was a long rant, but you can tell I care a lot about security. I've had jobs where I had to be responsible for security. I've gone and got several security certifications over the years, and I think that fundamentally we all need to have security on our mind whenever we're doing stuff. So I'm so glad. I would love to do a course on security. I actually have a friend who's an ethical hacker. He has courses on Udemy. I highly recommend. And I probably should do a course with him about Docker container security at some point, because I think that would be a great deep dive into container security, to kind of talk about some of these deeper issues and what they really mean when it comes to containers. So I would say, long story short on that, turning 15 minutes into one sentence, consider the slim image as an alternative to to Alpine. But if you've jumped on Alpine and everybody's okay with it, and your security team understands how Alpine runs on BusyBox and how BusyBox works and how security scanners don't scan it, like if they're okay with that, then proceed. I would just make sure though that you test heavily before updating in production, because of the continued, about once a quarter, 3 or 4 times a year, I have a new issue with something in Alpine that doesn't happen in Debian. Just reading through, catching up on some of the chat. Sorry I'm so behind today. Yeah, Biker's talking about the old days. 3278. I don't think I had anything that old, but I did have thick net and thin net, and I'm pretty sure we had token ring before I went Ethernet. Man, Ethernet was so cool. I was so excited. I did fiber optic Ethernet on a huge hub with like 50 ports. It had collisions all day long because it wasn't a switch. It was so slow because of nothing but, the lights were blinking red all day on the hub because it was like a 15 node hub. Oh man, it was so bad. It was just garbage. But we eventually figured out how to turn it into a switch. We actually had to swap out some modules in the enterprise hardware, and we turned it into a switch, which was really expensive back in 1996 or whatever. Cool, Marcos, on the PHP Symfony. Yeah, I work with some people that use Symfony. And yeah, their images are huge. A lot of the non-compiled languages make really huge images. Ruby, PHP, even Node.js sometimes with, I was working on a Node.js project recently that was a 1.5 gig image. And even after spending a week, I was only able to get it down to like 1.2 in production, or maybe 1.1 gig. It's because of all the node modules. It was just node modules was 800 meg and just in node modules. Docker Swarm or Kubernetes for small projects. It depends on what you want to do, Evans. I would say Swarm is absolutely the easiest. You already are learning Docker. You already have Docker. Just use Swarm. But if you wanted to learn Kubernetes and you didn't want something complicated, look at micro K8s or micro K8s, and then K3s or keys. Those two, K3s, micro K8s, those are great Kubernetes projects for starting to learn Kubernetes while not having to have all the complicated architecture set up. Because that can really discourage you when you realize, oh man, I got to do like 8 different containers just to deploy one app. Like, it seems like a lot. Yeah, Peter's jumping in on the Docker Swarm. Yep. I want to test a stack in a pipeline. How do I simulate the ingress network in case I want to run several tests in parallel? I would say run Docker in Docker. Look up Docker in Docker. That's a thing. So you can run Docker inside Docker. You can run Docker Swarm inside Docker Swarm, and then you can simulate whatever you need to. I love Swarm. I wish it had a feature like Docker Compose Up service name, like Docker service f Docker Compose create service name. Not sure what you mean there, Tuna. Not sure what it doesn't have. Like Docker Stack. Docker Stacks are great. Ooh, if it's a stateful set, you can scale replicas to 0 and then delete the PVC. Scaling backup will create new PVC. I'm not sure about deployments. Yeah, it's interesting about this, the scaling to 0. I didn't actually consider that. That's a great suggestion. I would assume that the requirement was that the containers could not go down. But that's a great, it's not really a hack because it is a feature, but it's a great point to point out that in a Kubernetes, you can also do this in Swarm. You can scale replicas to 0 and it won't delete the object. It will just not have any pods running. And it allows you to keep the objects there without having to delete the entire object. It's a great point. Great tip there. Mavindar? Hopefully I spelled that said that correctly. Mavindar. I'm going to read your other question that you just posted. Would Docker and Docker require mounting the Docker socket, which is risky? It just depends on how you do it. There are so many forms, not necessarily. So you can run Docker in Docker without having to have host privileges. You can also do Docker rootless. I don't know if you knew about Docker rootless. Go just search Docker rootless, which allows you to run Docker as a regular user. So you could have Docker running on the host as root, and then inside the container, you could run Docker rootless that doesn't need, the root. However, if you're trying to test ingress networking in Swarm, then realize that on Linux, the way that networking works with the kernel, you tend to have root to create new virtual interfaces, for example, VES. So you usually need to have a root-like permission in order to create a new virtual interface in a container, or basically create a new network. You may not need it for actually creating a new container on that network, but I do believe you need to have it for creating a new Docker network or a new Swarm network. So try rootless. Go check it out. There's an actual script. If you go to get.docker.com/rootless, you can get a script for installing rootless as any Linux user. Get.docker.com/rootless. And yeah. And then just Google it. There's actually a documentation page in the in the Docker docs, rather. So search Google for rootless Docker, and you'll find a docs page. Don't go looking at the blog articles. The blog articles are probably outdated, but there is a documentation page on the Docker docs about how to get rootless going. Nicker says, thanks, and I couldn't have learned K8s without your Udemy course. Great. And more is coming. I just got to get back to. We just got to release something. I'm over fixing videos. I want to do new stuff. So trust me, it's coming soon. We're just not working hard enough, I guess. I guess 7 days a week is not hard enough because I've been writing a blog post for the last 7 days, including my weekend. Hello there. Can I directly start K8s before Docker? Depends. So Kubernetes does not require Docker. It depends on what container runtime you're using. For example, if you're using micro K8s, it doesn't use Docker. It uses containerd. And containerd, so you can have Kubernetes and Docker running side by side. However, if you are running, for example, Kubernetes on Docker, which tends to be the default if you're creating it from scratch. If you're using a distribution or a cloud version of Kubernetes, they will have their own Kubernetes runtime that's probably not Docker. Just because Docker they don't need everything that is in Docker, so containerd tends to be the default. If you're on OpenShift, it's Cryo is the container runtime. So the answer is maybe, but Kubernetes still has to have a runtime, and here's an example. It's a little complicated. If you're on an edition of Kubernetes where the Kubernetes services are not containers, like micro K8s. Micro K8s does not run the control plane. I should say most of the control plane. It does not run the kubelet, the API, the scheduler, or the controller. It does not put those things in containers. It runs them as systemd services on the host. So no, it doesn't need a container to start. If you need a container, then you need the container runtime first. So, however, with micro K8s, if you enable the DNS, the core DNS server, which is optional, but you need it almost always, as soon as you enable that, that runs in a container. So then you would need containerd running. If you were on something built where the Docker runtime, like Docker Desktop or Docker Enterprise or I'm not sure if kubeadmin uses Docker by default anymore, but some of the tools use Docker by default. If you are using those, if they prefer all of the control plane running in containers, then yes, the container runtime has to be started first. I hope that helps. What do I recommend as a log exporter? I do not have a favorite. To me, log exporting is plumbing, and I use whatever is what the team is using or what the default is in that environment. If I am on CloudWatch in AWS, I may use their built-in tooling with EKS instead of opting for a third-party tool. If I'm deploying ELK, I will either choose something, I will choose what the Elasticsearch kit prefers, and there's usually one or the other. It kind of depends on the environment. If I am building my own log exporting and it's going to be shooting out to something like as a SaaS, Papertrail, which is one of my favorite logging tools. It's really simple. It's really cheap. But it does just raw logging, and what it excels at is searching logs. What it does not do is advanced graphs, and it doesn't merge into the world of metrics that when I last checked. It's really just about logging and log searching, and its syntax for searching is super fluid and easy to understand. But that kind of tool, it doesn't really matter. I will probably just, if I'm using Docker, I'll just use Docker. Like Docker has it built in, and I'll shoot those straight from Docker out. So I won't need a third-party tool. It just kind of, it's a tough thing. I don't have a default. Some tools like Rancher and other tools, they might come with their own out of the box that will collect the logs for me. So, yeah, the web dashboard hack on Tesla was one that was years ago. 2, that was on the default dashboard from Kubernetes. 3, it was before the Kubernetes dashboard came secure by default. So the mistake at Tesla was they simply did not password protect it. That's all they did. They didn't add protection. Whereas now, when you now use the latest edition, the 2.0 versions of the Kubernetes desktop or dashboard rather, that dashboard comes with the security by default, which is what every tool should be set at. And you have to go in and make special effort to disable the password, or it's not really password, it's actually the Kubernetes cluster certificate that it will use by default. So yeah, but that Tesla one was bad, but it was a great example of a team, what I'm sure were smart people. I mean, they work at Tesla, so I'm sure they're smart, but they set up Kubernetes and the default was insecure, and they left it like that because they thought, nobody's going to find it. And then someone did. So I'm always a fan of secure by default. Ooh, just became another patron. Let's play the air horn. Thanks. Thanks, Shiva. I really appreciate it. I'm always glad to hear that someone else has joined the crew. And we've got more benefits coming, including a new Discord server. So if you haven't tried Discord versus Slack, we've talked about it a couple times recently. I'm excited. It's another chat system, but I think it's way more IRC based. I like it because it brings me back to my IRC roots. You can have ops, moderators. You can give people permissions and ranks and roles. It doesn't require payment, but it allows us to search the entire history. It doesn't kill the chat history. It has ways to block people. You can do video, voice, and all the cool things. So expect that coming soon. We're still working on a last few little things, including a cool logo for launching it. We're setting it up as a community server, so it'll be for everyone, and it's going to be all about DevOps. I want to make it the best DevOps Discord on the planet, and you're going to help me do that. And so we're going to make a big announcement about that soon. Yet another thing that we're working on. And I might start streaming on Discord, because if you've ever used Discord, it's pretty cool. It's kind of like, what if Zoom, only better, was integrated into chat, and then it was like IRC, but it had built-in Giphies and emojis, and it didn't kill your history after 10,000 limits like Slack does, and it allows you to, do fun stuff. Anyway, that's what Discord is, and I've been a huge fan for years. But finally in 2020, they have announced that they are no longer just gaming. They are now focused on the wider audience of communities, which I've wanted them to do for years. And now they're actually officially doing it, likely because of COVID-19. But I don't know that for sure. I'm just speculating. But we're going to be announcing that and offering it as exclusive. We're going to have exclusive Patreon benefits where you're going to be able to get into little rooms with our buddies on our Patreon people where we can discuss DevOps topics. And we will be hosting our monthly DevOps hangout there maybe instead of Zoom. I might try doing it there. One of the cool things that you can do, by the way, in Discord that you can't do in Zoom, which is insane because I pay for Zoom, is that multiple people can be in a video audio chat and stream their screen at the same time. So you can have like 5 people all showing their screens, and then you can just click on which one you want to look at, which is kind of like Google Hangouts. But it's amazing that tools like, Slack and Hangout or Zoom rather don't do that, which is a super annoying thing when you're in a collaborative team. WebFTV Master. I became a patron last week. Okay. You get the horns. Tier 2, totally worth it. All right, the horns are for you, FTP. By the way, if you're still on FTP, hopefully that's ironic. FTP is cool, but FTP over SSH is better. SFTP, whatever. SCP, you name it. They use Anchor and Claire to scan. Yeah. So Manvindar, sorry if I'm again mispronouncing that. If you want to kind of troll the conversation, I would go in and say, hey, so curl's bundled with BusyBox. So if there's a curl vulnerability in the BusyBox image, will your scanner detect it? Maybe it does. Maybe it knows by BusyBox's release cycle and the vulnerabilities that are in, but they'd have to have a database that matches it. So, curl isn't the biggest tool that I'd worry about, but is OpenSSL in BusyBox? I don't know. I don't think it is. But BusyBox has vulnerabilities, and it's just a question of, are those scanners detecting them? Because that would be, it's still possibly valid that, it's still much smaller, but you got to compare apples to apples, right? If you're looking at one technology and saying, well, we're going to definitely do Alpine because it's more secure than Debian Slim, you're not really comparing apples to apples if the scanner isn't really scanning all the things in Alpine. That's really my argument. It's like, I would like to have a fair comparison, fair fight on these tools before I make a determination. But good luck. I don't suggest you troll the security office, by the way. Maybe the vendor, but not your security office. You don't want them to be your enemies. I want to be friends with everyone in my security team. Always picking on curl. It's because that's the only one knicker that I know about. It's because I know there's some utilities that come with BusyBox that aren't available in like Debian Slim or something, and that's just one of them. Yeah, always picking on curl. Curl is fantastic, and I think it's like one person that manages it. It's always the stuff that runs the internet that it's always just like one person sitting alone, protecting us from the baddies. Yeah, similar like La Magician. Is that how you say it? Le Magician? I'm probably beating that up. I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sure. I've heard this before about Python on Alpine, the glibc and that stuff in the libc. Yeah. Not a Python expert, so The DoD currently, DevOps security. Yeah, DevSecOps, Peter. I definitely would need to pull in other people. I know a couple. I don't know if they'd actually do a course with me. The course that we're working on building right now is DevOps Essentials. I haven't really announced it yet, so you're probably the first to hear it. But it's very, very early days. We don't even know if it's going to be launched this year. But it's going to be all of the things that aren't relating to tooling. Like there's not going to be any CLI in this course. It's going to be like 3 to 5 hours, probably like 5 hours. And it's going to be about the higher level concepts. It's basically going to be if you read the 3 top books on DevOps, like DevOps Handbook, Accelerate, a couple of the other ones. If you read those books, what is the gist? What is the actionable stuff from that book that I can apply to a project in people and workflows and methodologies? So that's going to be the next big course. And I've got a friend of mine working on it with me, and I'm just going to wet your lips on that. Yes, we're going to work on Kubernetes first and updating Docker Mastery before that. Like that's all going to happen. But the next big thing is really going to help the community basically as an intro, because I don't think if you go to these websites today for courses and you look up DevOps, the first thing they want to throw you at is tooling. And tooling is not what you should be doing first. You've got to read some books that have nothing to do with Jenkins or Docker before you start on the tooling. Because if you start with the tooling and you don't understand the workflows and the processes and the methodologies and the why, then the tooling isn't going to solve those problems, because there is no such thing as a DevOps tool. No matter what anybody's marketing says, there is no DevOps tool. There are tools that help you achieve DevOps goals and help you implement DevOps practices. But frankly, so can Bash scripts, and they've been around for 50 years. Maybe not Bash, maybe shell scripts have been around for 50 years. And those can help you implement automation for DevOps. So that's what we want to do next. And we're just barely getting started. But anyway, that's what's going to happen. I'm doing the Elk stack. I have set up, there are 3 nodes with a cluster. Would you recommend to switch to Docker Swarm cluster for prod? Yeah, absolutely. Milos or Milos? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Sorry about your name. But yes, I would do Swarm. I would really do Swarm. Anytime you're doing Compose, I would absolutely consider Swarm on a server. You get so many instant things out of the box with Swarm that you don't get with Compose. So if you weren't here earlier, there's the link again, just putting it in chat. For Compose or Swarm, I have a whole opinionated article on GitHub about GitHub or Swarm. Not GitHub or Swarm. Compose or Swarm. Compose or Swarm. A warning that gave today. Yes. Yeah, it's a good one. I like that. Nice, short explanation. I have experience on AWS ECS, and I want to start learning Kubernetes. I bought your course, but not getting kicked to learn. Any interactive tip? Not getting the kick to learn. You mean like you're not motivated? Is that what you mean? Or is my course not helping you with EKS? Because I don't teach EKS yet in my courses. So I assume what you mean is that you just need to get motivated. I would say maybe the easiest way to get motivated is, depending on which course you've taken of mine, are you taking Kubernetes Mastery or Docker Mastery? But if you're taking Kubernetes Mastery, which is the Kubernetes only course and teaches you Kubernetes assuming you know Docker, I would say take an app that you care about and simply try to make it run on your local machine with Docker Desktop Kubernetes, which is the easiest way to run Kubernetes locally. Just use Docker Desktop, run Kubernetes in that, and learn enough of the course to where I teach you how to make manifest YAML. It's not that much into the course. It's not 20 hours. It's maybe 5 hours of video. And then you'll learn how to make the YAML. And the most important thing is you'll learn the command lines and the API ways of how you discover creating the YAML. Because I'm sure we've all searched the internet for blog examples of how to create Kubernetes manifest. But you don't want to. You only want to do that to start with. You don't want that to be the way you always learn how to do manifest. You really want to learn how the API thinks, and there are specific command line tools for that. There are websites with API references for that. And so once you get to that part, then just stop and see if you can make your app run in Kubernetes. Maybe that'll get you motivated. If not, then, stick with ECS. There's nothing wrong with ECS. I would say go ECS Fargate. I love Fargate. I mean, if you can use Fargate, use it, because that gets you away from having to manage servers. As much as I love to mess with servers every day, I'd rather not have to be responsible for patching production servers every month or replacing them every month because they need patched, and I just replace them with a newer release. And that's what Fargate can do for you. It gets you out of the server management business. K3D. K3D. What were we referencing? I don't. That was a conversation a few minutes ago. I don't remember. For Docker container security class, who was the Udemy teaching for ethical hacking? Yes. Let me show you. Nope, not that one. My friend Zaid. All right. So I'm going to give you his user account. He's got 500,000 students. And we met at the Udemy conference. And so we chat every now and then about our courses, and he is super popular in the ethical hacking community and the security community. He's got 9 courses, everything about ethical hacking, dark web, encryption, social engineering. Lots of cool stuff there. And he's a great guy, super nice guy. Highly recommend his stuff. Unfortunately, I do not have coupons for his stuff, but I could get them, but I don't have them. Or you can just wait for a sale, which Udemy does every couple times a month. They can do big sales. So wait for the sale and grab his courses. And he's got bestsellers in there, 3 bestsellers, 4 bestsellers, 5 bestsellers, and a highest rated 6 bestsellers. Oh my goodness, I'm so jealous. So how does he have 6 bestsellers? That's impossible. Anyway. Crazy man how many students he has. And I wish him all the luck. He's working hard, hustling out there. Is micro K8s now a prod thing? They used to expose the Kube API ports insecurely to the public. And I saw people running this getting blamed when they were complaining about it online because it was dev software. I don't, honestly, I don't. I'm trying to remember. So I have not used it in production. They are now making it HA, so that makes me think that they're leading it towards production workflow because they're building HA into it. I do not know specifically off the top of my head about the API port. I have a single node micro K8s in my office here. It's in the closet actually. And I control it remotely. And I'm trying to remember if I had to manually open the port or if it was, I feel like I had to manually open the port. But don't quote me on that. So maybe that's something that's old, 6 corners. That's maybe a great question. I would have to test it. I mean, it runs on 8080 by default, I believe. And I feel like I had to open that, somehow change it to run on the host. But it was years ago when I first did it. And it's always worked since through every upgrade. Because it's an easy upgrade with the snaps. So I don't have to redo it every time. Mounting Docker socket is not risky. Let's be clear about what the Docker socket is. Depends on what you're doing with it that's risky. It's not the fact that the Docker socket is risky. You can also extrapolate. You can also put a proxy in front of the socket and do it over the network and then make it read-only. and then you can actually control the verbs that you're using with it, and that will make it even safer if you need to do read only. The reality is that the Docker socket is quite often needed just for monitoring tools. So people sometimes freak a little bit out about the Docker socket, and I'm not saying that you're one of those. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that let's get a little more educated about what the Docker socket's really doing. You do basically having full uncontrolled access to the Docker socket is like having root on the host. So yes, that is a thing. But what are you already doing, right? Most people that are doing CI, if we're still talking about the Docker and Docker thing, I think it was specifically about a CI thing. Most CI job runners are running as root on a host. And a lot of places I go, they're running Jenkins, and they have dedicated Jenkins servers that are running root privileges. So this is no more than that, right? This is no worse. The Docker socket can be used securely, not by file bind mounting it, because when you file bind mount it, by the way, and you put in the dash read only on the end of it, that doesn't actually work. The file bind mount will always be read write. But you can do network Docker socket connections and put a proxy in front of that socket, and that's how I do it for my examples, like Docker. Let's see, dog versus cats. So on my dog versus cat repo, I have an example here for my proxy. So whenever you put in a front-end proxy, often in a cluster, it will always need access to either the Kubernetes API or the Docker socket. I mean, both of those are essentially giving root access to the cluster in most cases because they're getting read-write. But in a lot of those cases, you can make it read-only because those proxies tend to really only need read-only. It's a little bit easier to do and more intuitive in Kubernetes, but in Docker, you can totally do it. So I do it in this, and I will just put this in there as an example. If you would like a read-only Docker socket, which is totally fine inside your cluster, I'm not saying you'd put it on the internet, but inside your cluster, this is totally safe. As long as you control the verbs and what they can get access to. So Docker socket, this is a really great little tool. And all it's running is HA proxy in front of the Docker network socket. Actually, what it's doing is it's translating TCP to file socket with HA proxy, because HA proxy is awesome. And it's allowing, what this little utility does is it limits the verbs inside the API to only those that you care about in this specific use case. So for example, I don't give it access to secrets or to the entire swarm or to the individual containers. I only give it access to see the networks, see the services, and see the tasks. And it's kind of small. I'm sorry there. But this is possible over the network by putting a proxy in place. And then what happens is my traffic front-end proxy talks to this proxy and gets the data out of the Docker socket without having over-provisioned access to the root sockets on all nodes. So I'm a big fan of this method. I've done this in production on my own stuff. I don't know this person, and I don't know how popular this is, so I would probably fork this, read through all the code, trust it myself. From what I remember looking at, it's basically a stock HA proxy with a few maybe bash scripts or things wrapped around it. Or options wrapped around it, I'm thinking. But who knows whether it's the latest HA proxy, whether it's kept up to date. So if I was going to do this for a customer, which I totally would, I would probably adopt this into my own tooling. I would make it up to date. I would sort of pass a security audit on it just to make sure that it's legit, and then test it. If you have a pen tester on hand, have them go against this and see if they can't get through this proxy. And I trusted enough to use it on my personal projects, at least, because I did like a 20-minute check of it, and it seemed very legit and a very reasonable approach to the whole thing. And yeah, I'm a fan. So, all right, we're at 2 hours and 20 minutes, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. Let's see if we can rapid fire these questions that are left. If you're still around, waiting for questions to be answered. When you're not using Terraform to install Docker on the host, what do you use? I use the script from Docker, the get.docker.com script. If I'm only installing Docker and I don't need anything else, then and I can't or don't need to use Terraform, I will just use get.docker.com. I will pull that shell script down, and then you can actually use environment variables to set versions so that you can have specific versions installed if you want to pin your Docker version, which in a swarm is usually a good idea to have them all at the same version. I'll do that. Thanks, man. Yeah, asking security questions with the other Kubernetes guys out there. No one gave so much insight on it. Well, I take that as a very big compliment. Thank you very much. Hopefully, everything I said is correct. Because it's what I do in my conference talks. And when I have security people on, I always ask more questions. If you want to hear more security stuff, by the way, go to Bret.live and go back in the year. Liz Rice was on. She's a security pro. She works for Aqua Security, and she teaches really low-level stuff like how to make Docker from scratch, using Go language, stuff like that. She's been on this show this year. I'm sure that I've had other security people on before as well. I need to have Zaid on. I just realized I need to get that guy on this show. Another person I need to have on this show. So I'm going to make that a note. All right. See you on episode 96. Thanks. Yes, I will see you next week. Let's see. A couple more questions real quick. How to use the same Docker image, example, Node.js Express app from Docker Hub in all dev, test, and prod. I think the first thing you need to do is look into multi-stage images. That way, and go look at my example repo from DockerCon 19. I put that in here earlier. So DockerCon 19, I did a whole talk on Node.js and multi-stage images. That's how you can get different stages to be for different uses. So it would be the same image Docker file, and technically the image would be used differently locally than it would be in production, but at least it would give you one path and one Docker file for all scenarios. Owen is saying Discord is much better. Yes. In fact, all of you, yes, look at all these. This is like from 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago. Yeah, so more news coming on the Discord. Call me Manny. All right, sure. Yes, us Americans, we just have a hard time with names. Sorry about that. So Manny it is. All right. Difference between DevOps and AI ops. I don't know what AI ops are. That's a good question. I don't know. AI ops? I don't know how that's different, but I don't really work with any AI teams. And to me, the word AI is overused anyway, just like the word DevOps, just like the word cloud before it. Like everybody's saying their software is AI now, and I'm pretty sure their software is not much different than it was a year ago when they said it wasn't AI. So I don't know why everybody's claiming AI is in their software. To me, a lot of these people that say they're using AI really are just using fancy software. It's just not really AI. It's not intelligent. It's just advanced. Let's see. But I don't know. Tell me what the difference is. I don't know. I don't even know this thing, AI ops. How you determine how many labels to use? As few as possible. That's all I'm going to say about it. As few as possible. Don't use them if you don't ever need them. Don't put them in there. They're only good for when you need to troubleshoot or filtering, and a lot of people don't need them. So why put them in? I say maybe 2, 3. You can get away with it. I can help with the Discord server logo if you need. Thank you for the offer. I actually have somebody already working on it, but thanks. What else can you do? Find me on Twitter. Are you a graphic artist? I'm always looking for more graphic artists and designers to help in the team. So if you're someone who knows someone to recommend, come and help me out. And I'm also always looking for someone who's a good teacher's assistant. So if you've taken both of my courses or all 4 of my courses, and you would like, a little part-time gig on the side, doing answering questions of students, for 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, if you'd like a job like that, then send me a DM on Twitter. My DMs are always open on Twitter. So we got a great one who's probably around somewhere today. I haven't seen him here today. But I'm always looking for other people to help because my courses get 50 questions a day and it's a lot. So always looking for people that are willing to help out and want to basically help support the community that are all learning these container tools. So, but also designers. I'm always looking for good designers. I love putting new spiffy things like, like this. Hey, why are my images broke? That's weird. I know they're not broke everywhere. Yeah, like those wonderful images. I don't know what Chrome is doing on me today, but like those wonderful images. Those were, well, the good ones. The ones with the little fox. Those are made by a friend of mine, designer, Luke Mai. And she's really good. And I'm always looking for more design help and better graphics stuff. So sure, reach out to me with a DM on Twitter and let's work something out. All right. Couple more questions. Hey, Bret, is tiny still the recommended way to terminate processes in Node.js containers? Ronald, I'm trying to remember if we had this conversation before. I feel like we did. Teeny, Tini, actually. Yes, Teeny. You corrected it there. It is necessary only if you're not developing the process monitoring into the app itself. So this is true with Python. This is true with other languages. If your application is not watching for stop signals from Linux, then yes, use Teeny. But if Node.js, like the other ones, if you can't adjust the code, I mean, it's really going to only be like 50 lines of code, if that. If you can't do that, then Teeny is preferred. I would prefer not to have to use Teeny. And you do that by adding in some sample code. I do that with the DockerCon 19 release. I feel like we've already had this conversation, so maybe we've already talked about it. But there is nothing newer than Teeny in terms of putting it in a container. It does the job, and it probably will be the default for the remainder of Docker's existence because it just works and it's pretty simple. If you would like any help for that course, please let me know. Peter, which course were you talking about? Further educate myself. Yeah, I mean, we have lots of ideas about maybe making an insiders community a higher Patreon level where you get access to stuff before we're finished, maybe like rough drafts or before a section's finished and polished and produced and closed captioning's done and the graphics are done and the intro music is done and they're released as a whole section. Like we're talking about stuff like that. Maybe the DevOps course. Yeah. So send me a DM on Twitter. I have enough help in creating the content. Maybe it's more about what we're looking for right now. Maybe is people that are maybe certified in DevOps or have had official training from like the DevOps Institute, DevOps Academy, like these sort of things that can kind of vet some of the output. But that's not going to happen for months. But hey, if you want to help out, Peter, I'd love to have more help on the team. I'm always looking for good people that are educated and want to do good work for a little bit on a side gig, a little side hustle. So moonlighters, as we call them. But I'm always ready to get some more help with the things we're doing, basically, so we can make more stuff faster because you all want it, and I cannot make it as fast as you want it. But yes. How do you keep all this stuff up to date? When I update Kubernetes, does it upgrade any of the controllers and stuff? So, okay, hold on. Because the first question, Six Corners, the first question was, I thought you were asking me about how I keep this stuff up to date. And I was getting ready to say, well, I don't, which is why we're having to fix a couple dozen videos from 6 months ago that broke. But two, what you were really talking about was Kubernetes. Does Kubernetes upgrade any of the controllers and stuff? No. So a big thing with Kubernetes is doing the upgrades of the control plane, which is all that stuff to run containers. It's at least, on a production cluster, it's probably a dozen or more containers at least, probably more like 20 containers. Not even talking about monitoring and logging. And yes, that is a thing. And it can, if you're doing it yourself on a vanilla upstream install of Kubernetes that you installed from GitHub, yes, that can be a lot of work. But that's why I always recommend distributions, because these distributions do all that testing and provide the automation for the upgrades for you. So, for example, if you buy Rancher or Docker Enterprise or OpenShift or something, they will provide ways for easier upgrades that are validated. If you're doing a cloud hosting, they usually have a one-button upgrade option. So I would advise those first before you ever hand build your own clusters, because that's a lot of work. And if it's a business and it's about business money, like I don't really want to have to maintain infrastructure that a business relies on for mission critical if I can just use an outsourced service, or use someone else's product, like Rancher, which is open source and free, or OpenShift, which is sometimes free. And I don't really understand the licensing of OpenShift. Or something that's reasonably cost effective, like EKS, which is very cheap compared to just doing it yourself on Amazon. Or Fargate, which I still think is really cheap, and you can manage no servers. You see the trend here? As much as I am an infrastructure guy, we always have more work to do. So I'd rather not manage the infrastructure if I can avoid it. Let's see. Hey, Bret, are there some books, the ones you were talking about, that don't talk about tooling, but the higher level that you recommend? Yes, DevOps Handbook and Accelerate are the two top ones. They're actually written by the same group of people. Well, actually, I mean, that may not be true. I'm not sure if Gene is in Accelerate. But what are your thoughts on a book club? Just had this idea the other day. Amazon has a new feature for book clubs, and it's a beta, which I signed up for the beta, but I'm still in the waiting list. And I thought, what if we did a book club and we all were like reading a book, like the Oprah book club, but for DevOps? Anyway, that was the thought I had. So, nodeless Kubernetes. So do you mean like ECS, like EKS Fargate? I love it, and I think that's the future of all Kubernetes platforms. So if that's what you're talking about, nodeless Kubernetes might be a different word. Maybe tell me what that means. It doesn't mean what I think it means. I think there's a nodeless Kubernetes that you're talking about that I read up on maybe a year ago, and then I forgot about. I don't remember exactly what it meant, so you might have to help me. Fargate messed with some liberty in our workflow of development, so we switched back to plain ECS. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely hard edges on Fargate, right? Like Fargate will, like if you want persistent storage, nope. There's a lot of things that it won't do. But if you can fit in the model of Fargate, then always do it, right? Because to me, it will free you up to do the other things that you need to do rather than managing the servers that you don't want to have to manage. A lot of people, quite frankly, use ECS and then they just don't manage their servers, which I think is a bad habit. I mean, they've got these unpatched servers. They're not rotating them out on a regular basis. And that's a bad habit, and I wish they wouldn't do it. But I know how it is. We're all super busy. We're overtaxed. We've got too many jobs assigned to us. So, yeah. First time posting, Virgil. Just use your Swarms course to deploy a Swarm cluster to production. Very nice. One question is there a recommended way of running crons in a Swarm stack? So go look on GitHub. There are multiple cron options. There's no clear winner. You can find several repos. Just use Swarm cron on GitHub. There is jobs, not cron jobs, but jobs are coming in the next release of Swarm, supposedly sometime this year. We don't know when. But we're waiting on Docker. The source code is in the Docker master repo in Moby, as they call it, but it is not. It is not made into a release of Docker yet. So that's just jobs, not the cron part, but just the one-off task running. So you have to have one-off task running, and then you layer on top of that the cron functionality of repeated one-off tasking. So yeah, go check that out. It's probably just look up Swarm jobs. I also talked about that earlier this year on the show. If you go to Bret.live, go back into the videos, into the history. There was one called Swarm 2020 Update. We talked about the jobs a lot. I'm not sure if I covered the third-party tooling, but it's on there. With regard to micro K8s, what I said is old. They changed it. They made it bind to the localhost address, but like that's still vulnerable to DNS rebinding attacks. I'm hoping it's been updated since then. Can you ask the micro K8s person about the security of running it, or is it considered a prod thing when you talk to him? Okay, yeah, Six Corners. I will try to remember the security stuff. The DNS rebinding attack, that's a pretty interesting one. I haven't seen an example of that in the wild. I'm trying to think about how that would work on localhost. Because it would have to be on the host, not in the containers. Because the containers are going to be accessing the IP address in the subnet of Kubernetes, not the host IP subnet. Anyway, that's something to talk about, yeah, is how that works compared to other distributions. But cool. Thanks for doing that research. We're all in the same show. That was pretty cool. Thanks. We use that in our Jenkins server. Oh, I'm not sure what that's for. That's for something earlier. How do I implement multi-tenancy? Learn the crap out of Kubernetes. Multi-tenancy is the last thing you should learn. It's hard. It is complicated. And I don't have a recommendation because I don't work with any teams that do it. It requires an enterprise tooling set that is able to manage all of the access control lists, because that will get very... I mean, you got to learn multiple things, right? You have to learn about network policies, and you have to implement a network tool that supports network policies so that it can segregate out the different networking. And then you have to learn about the Kubernetes ACLs and the role-based access controls that all have to happen in order to segment out the user access for the admins, right? So that is a lot. And I am not the smartest person on the planet about that stuff because I've never had to implement it. I've only read about it. And I understand those concepts from an enterprise mindset because I had to do that for many of things over the years in enterprise, but I've never had to do it on Kubernetes myself. So it's really something that if your first Kubernetes is to be multi-tenancy, that's a really tough road to hoe. Road to hoe? Road to hoe. Yeah, I think I'll have to look that one up. That's a tough one because it requires so much understanding of the internals of Kubernetes and all the permissions and all the potential ways you can mess it up. Controlling access to not just the resources, but also the networking and the ingress, and how to make sure, for example, that one person's ingress doesn't step on another person's ingress. And, just the ingress alone on making sure that I can't put DNS in mine that will cause it to overwrite the ingress rule of someone else's on the same cluster is super tricky. So I'd say you need a team of at least 3 people, and you need some serious experience. I mean, I'm just being honest. Hate to give you I hope that's not bad news. You probably already knew that, but I hope it's not bad news. Yeah. The DevOps course, answering the earlier question. Let me know if you come to Spain, Ronald. I'll buy you a beer. Okay, so as soon as this COVID crap goes away, that might happen. I have a friend who's going to Spain. Not sure if they're going. They might be going sooner than I'm comfortable with traveling. I mean, one of those things where you might be able to travel safely during COVID, but it's not going to be near as fun because like a lot of stuff isn't open and a lot of touristy things aren't available, and just maybe next year, who knows. I mean, we're not going to be out of this COVID mess by next year, but we might have reasonable methods for safely traveling and understanding the virus a little bit better. So I hope to be there soon because I love Spain. I've been to Barcelona. It was fantastic. I got stuck in a champagne room at 2 a.m. and it was wonderful. So yes. And I have a friend who used to live in Spain, and I have several friends in Spain, and now you're another one. So yes, let's do it. Let's make that happen. I will jump the pond. All right. I would like to translate to Spanish if it can be done on the platform. Marcos, if you have a handle on Spanish and English and you are good at translation, send me a DM in Twitter. So jump on Twitter, send me a DM. My DMs are open. I'm always looking for people to help with the translation in the course. That is no small undertaking. Any course that I do, if you look at Docker Mastery, for example, it is in, I think, at least 5 languages, but the only language that is human validated, where one of my team members will actually go through every single video and perfect every line, is English. So the translations are done on that English, and the translations are automated. So you know how good that is. I need a team of people for each language because, for example, Docker Mastery is 150 videos, and that would take someone a very long time. So if you're interested in part-time work and you would like, what I can do is I can send you a test video and see how well you do, and I will compare your translation against other translations that I have friends do, and we will work on it together. And if you have the time, and we'll figure out something. I would, yeah. I think other ones I'm interested in are German, Portuguese, maybe French. But yeah, I mean, even the automated services are really, it would basically cost me to do one course just for one language on rev.com. I think it was going to be like $4,000 per language. So it's a lot of money to do it, even when it's through an online service. So I would be happy to pay someone part-time for that. Is there a certification for DevOps? Yes. I honestly just Google it. It's the DevOps Institute, I think. And then there's also cloud versions. Like you can actually do I think there's a Google one, maybe even an Amazon one that have DevOps words in the title. But I think there is a DevOps Institute. I'm not familiar with it. But ITIL or somebody might even have one. I don't know for sure, but I would think honestly Google's going to be better at telling you that than I do. Even if I use Kubernetes distribution, let's say I added Kubernetes dashboard to it or applied some random YAML from some web page, how do I keep it up to date? Or even, what about your dog versus cat YAML files? How do I keep those images up to date? So, all right, so great question, Six Corners. The quickest answer, because we're about to get at 3 hours now, which I think will be one of my records for this show. But you all have such great questions. I'm just going to keep going as long as I can. I'm going to have to get some water soon, though. I don't have any water. Forgot my water today. So GitOps, look up GitOps. So one of the things you want, there's 2 main ways to do it. One is that you would have your CI, whenever it automatically builds your images, it would change some templated YAML or change some, basically you would have your CI tool automatically deploy the manifest files in Kubernetes, and it would have an updated version number. So all your images, each time you build, would have a new ID in the tag, and that might be the commit ID from GitHub. That might be, some symver that you decide to auto create. It's up to you how you want to do it. A date-based one, whatever. The idea is that they're different every time it builds. So every time you do a code commit, it goes and CI picks up that code commit. Then it tests it. It builds an image, tests it, and then if you want it to deploy based on the rules that you make in your CI, it will then deploy that manifest file using templating for the tags, right? So it'll just update the tags based on the latest commits. The alternative is to do something like GitOps, where GitOps will watch either the manifest file in a GitHub repo or the images in Docker Hub or a registry, and watch for changes there based on things like either git commits or symver, or some sort of naming convention that you say anything with the word prod in the tag name means deploy this new image into, and that's all GitOps tools like Flux, Flux, or Argo CD, which will be next week on this show. So if you're really interested in that, just join me same time this week, 1 p.m. Eastern here next week, and my friend Victor will be on talking about Argo, which will help you in the GitOps workflow, which is mainly about making all of our changes to our infrastructure and even our app deployments and infrastructure in Git, and making Git the single source of truth, so that everything in your Git log shows the changes that are happening in your server. And then ideally creating tooling around that using things like Flux and Argo, using those tools to automate it. That's the short example. That's the short answer. There's a bunch of other ways to do it, but those are the ones you'd use. Fargate doesn't support image caching as well. It really hindered our workflow. Okay, good to know. I could see how that would be a problem considering it's a shared hosting environment. So yeah, image caching. Anytime you're doing anything shared with Docker, image caching, like shared CI tools, image caching is a problem. Don't say master now, it will be main. Yes. Well, a lot of my repos are main, so I've changed them to main. But I agree with you. Moz, with the new Ingress API v1, K8s multi-tenancy has become a bit easier. Oh yes, I forgot about that. So when it was announced, the beginning of the summer, I forgot when that was. The new API was being announced for actually going v1. I was so excited. I didn't ever think it was going to go v1. So multi-tenancy. So yeah. So the patterns for the rules, for the URL rules. That's great to know. That's a great. I probably either didn't know that or I'd forgot, because I remember reading about it. And I never implemented it. So thanks for that update, Moz. Yes, Docker Master is a long course, but if you need somebody to help with German, I can correct the auto translation. Yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for, because it already provides the auto translation files. It really just needs edits, So it's a matter of like looking at the English, and then that language side by side, and then fixing the edits and re-uploading them. So if you're into that, DM me on Twitter. I'm always looking for people, especially people that know the content, because I can always hire some random person on the internet that doesn't know anything about containers to help with that work. But I'd much rather have someone who's interested in the content and understands the context of what I'm saying and the terminology, because that's always going to be a better translation. But yeah. In fact, wouldn't it be cool if I could be, let's just say this. Here's the thing about translation, is I care enough about translation to even do this. I do not know of another course on the internet that even barely any of them even change the closed captioning for English. And I certainly don't know of any that hand edit with expert teams each language of the translation. I don't know anyone else that's doing that. At least nothing in Docker. I keep looking because I keep thinking, am I really bad for not having this fixed already? But then I look at every other course, and that they don't. If they even have extra languages, they're auto translated. Even a lot of times it's just the English that's auto translated because it's expensive and it's hard, right? A lot of work. So I'm all about it. Yes, everyone who wants to work on that, DM me on my Twitter, and I will corral us into rooms together based on languages, and we'll figure that stuff out, and I'll figure out a way to compensate you somehow, and we will do it. I mean, I'd love to be able to say that's the only Docker course and Kubernetes course on the planet that is human translated into 5 languages. I mean, how amazing would that be? I'd love that. Now, maybe I should say the closed captioning is translated, not fully. It's not audio translated. We've also thought about doing that. Like, what if we just had actual audio translated for every video, like a movie would have? Man, that would be a lot of work for somebody, but that would be cool. I would still love to do that too. I'm afraid how much it would cost, but that would be really cool. I would love to say, yeah, you can listen to me in German, and Spanish, and Portuguese. Ooh, 6 corners. Okay, DNS rebinding attacks. I worry about go like serving a page on some domain, changing that domain name to point to, then doing requests from that page against what's now localhost. This bypasses the same origin policy. Yep. Some clients were vulnerable to it. So binding to localhost isn't enough. Interesting. I'm very interested in this. Yeah. So in other words, you're going to a website from that thing. I'll be interested in exploring that and talking about that. Maybe that's something I can bring up with my friend on our security. Not that I'm gonna have to do this with Zaid. I'm gonna have. He doesn't know it yet, but he's gonna be on this show, and we're gonna have a security one. Do you use bucket storage like Minio for images under the hood? No, but is Minio one of those things that replicates across servers? I'm not sure if I remember what Minio is. Self-hosted cloud storage. Yeah. No, I don't do that. For images under the, you mean like for course images? I'm not really sure what you were asking for. All right. 3 hours in 10 minutes. We're going to break the record. And then I'm going to say bye-bye. S3 compatible storage. Yeah. I mean, me myself, I don't use S3 a lot. So Minio is not something I use a lot easier either. In terms of like static asset hosting for me and mine, I use Netlify a lot. I mean, I'm using a lot of SaaS because it's a small team. So we use, hosting services a lot that just provide their own CDNs. But I love Netlify. I use the crap out of Netlify, which just hosts. It's like GitHub pages on steroids. And that's not really anything like S3, but Netlify has basically the automation backed by CDN storing any file, anything I want, any asset I want, and it allows me to do things like spin up a website using static site generators, and then tell it that I want a new website for every branch of this repo to automatically be generated and hosted on a new website for each branch I create, and then use this automation script to build my assets, minify them, and then put it on a CDN around the world. And then use it for this subdomain and automatically make new subdomain DNS records for every one of them, and then do all that for free. That's what Netlify does. So I use them a lot. It's pretty great, and some of my friends work there too, so I recommend it. All right, Six Corners giving me some background on that Ethereum, so I will check that out later. It doesn't let me click on the link. Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, I'll look into that. DNS rebind protection. Interesting. That'd be a good point to talk about. I'll actually ask him about this on Twitter when I talk to him. All right. We are looking for a solution where you can upload images from Drupal, which are in turn stored in container, but we have not created the PVC yet, so scaling is kind of not possible. Yeah. So it's like a Drupal backend storage. Which are in turn stored in a container. Maybe not. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different solutions to that. I would always try to find a platform or a software as a service to do it all for me, rather than hosting it myself. I mean, some of the things I've seen are people just using, something like, if they're in containers using Kubernetes and Swarm or something like that, they might set up. This is a little more manual, not quite using a CDN like infrastructure, but you could probably CDN it. But a simple way would be doing Nginx as a proxy, a caching proxy, enable caching in that proxy inside the containers, so that it would cache once those images are pulled, and then the images are just stored on EFS on AWS, so that you have a central store of all the images that are just on a file-based image store, and it doesn't have to be super fast because Nginx is going to cache them. And then just giving a lot of storage, local temporary file storage to the Nginx images. You would still have to front end that with a CDN if you wanted to be worldwide fast, but I'm sure there's a better way with S3. I just don't know it off the top of my head. There's probably a lot better ways, but that's the one way I've done it. I've seen like custom automation scripts that go inside of things like Drupal that will auto upload them to S3, and then you're done. Just putting it in an S3 bucket. But I've not looked at self storage. Plus 100 stamina. Yeah, so I was waiting to break the 3-hour mark because I was like, well, might as well just say I did a 3-hour live stream, and didn't even get out of my chair. So I've got 4 minutes on my clock. So I'm going to keep answering questions for 4 minutes. And then lunch. And I'm all caught up on questions. Well, we've had 862 playbacks on YouTube. Pretty good for today. How do these GitOps things determine when there are new images in Docker Hub? Polling? Webhooks. I don't think it's polling. I think it's webhooks. But yes, polling is probably also a method. Yeah, it's either polling or webhooks. That's really the two main ways I've seen it. Where are you staying in the U.S.? I am in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So right on the East Coast, about 6 blocks off the ocean. Let's see. Hey, Bret, I'm here after purchasing your course on Udemy. Fantastic stuff. I'm a storage admin planning to get into your Docker and Kubernetes. I can do some scripting in Perl. Can I break into Docker as a career? Sure, you can break into Docker as a career. Like, why not? There are lots of people that have taken my courses and then went and got jobs in Docker and DevOps. So I wouldn't say that my courses will complete your DevOps training, because there's more to DevOps than just containers, but it's a significant portion. And I've had enough students now. I mean, heck, I've had 3 or 4 students get hired by Docker after taking my courses. So I try not to loudly proclaim that all you need to do is take my course, because quite frankly, this is on you, right? You got to do the work. You got to do the labs. You should probably do all the assignments at least twice. You should probably go take some other course as well. I'm not the only opinion out there. And you should practice a lot. And you should put some stuff on GitHub. Make some, put some of your projects and your learnings on GitHub. Make some open source. Take whatever you're interested in and build a Kubernetes manifest for it, and build a Docker file for it, and put them on GitHub and blog about it. Like, that's how you kind of get yourself out there. And then when you start interviewing, you have all these things to show off, because the interviewers want to see what you've been doing. And so if you show them, hey, you know what? I haven't had a job in DevOps yet, but look at all this stuff I've done on GitHub with my Docker tooling. I've made these Docker files, and I'm really into drones. So I made a bunch of drones on Raspberry Pi things, or whatever, right? Whatever you're into. I wrote a new Netflix. I am the next Twitter, whatever you want to write. Or if you're not even a developer, that's fine. Then take a bunch of apps that you've heard of, or that your company uses, or that you're interested in, and make them work in Docker. Then make them work on Swarm. Then make them work in Kubernetes. Then go learn Terraform and make them work on AWS using Terraform. And yes, that'll take you a while. But once you have all that stuff in GitHub, then you have like a resume in open source. And that will go a long way towards getting a job. And then I have stuff for you. So if you want to get into DevOps, I have a whole article on it that I will put into chat. It's a common question on this show, so I made a AMA post about it. So I host this AMA on GitHub, and people come and ask questions. And I have a whole bunch of answers here about DevOps, like what you need to learn, how you should learn it, what order should you learn about the history of DevOps. It's a little larger. It's more DevOps, less just about Docker. But there are certainly people in companies that they only do Docker or they only do Kubernetes. And they don't really have to do all of the things DevOps, because DevOps is a big world of many, many, many tools. And I know this many tools when it comes to the thousands of tools now that claim they're in DevOps. So yes, netizen, you can do it too. And yes, a lot of students have, I've lost count. It's got to be at least 50 at this point, have come back to me over the years saying that they got a new job. In fact, one of them, several of them, are actually on this show on a regular basis in the chat. And my courses aren't the only thing you need, but it's a big start if you finish them. All right, we've hit the 4:01. We hit the 3-hour mark. 3 hours is over. This is the second longest live stream I've ever done. The longest being DockerCon, which was 7 hours. No, actually it was 9 hours by the time we were finished, because we had a happy hour afterwards for all the speakers and Docker captains. So that was the longest time I'd ever sitting in this chair with only like a couple of breaks. But it's time for me to wrap it up. 3 hours is a long time. I know, it's crazy. So I'm back here next week, this same time, 1 o'clock US Eastern. That's UTC -4. Go to Bret.live for signing up for the whenever it shows up in the next couple of days. You can click the subscribe button now, but there'll be a button you can click to remind you right before we go live next Thursday. I will have my friend Victor Favrik. He's going to talk about Argo CD, and we are going to talk about GitOps, which is essentially using Git to automate your infrastructure and solve a lot of problems and get you out of the kube control, apply, Docker run, blah, blah, blah. That's what we're going to be doing. So remember, I'm on Patreon. If you want to support this show, the podcast, all the things. We had a podcast come out last week, and then another one's coming. You can support me on Patreon. You can either click the follow button for free, and you can get all my updates on everything I'm updating, all the stuff I'm releasing. It is no fluff. The fluff is left to the social medias. This is not social media. This is Patreon. This is where you want to know about what am I creating, and this is where you learn that. And then you can join for a few bucks a month if you'd like the extra benefits of membership. And I will see you next week back here on YouTube Live. Thank you so much for hanging out for the 3-hour marathon. We'll be back here with Victor and the GitOps stuff next week. Ciao.